The story begins on the street of a nocturnal, but at the same time bright city in a building with a burning sign Karaokezilla. The guy walks along a brightly lit corridor, along many doors, confidently and very loudly stomping, as if he had been here thousands of times. With a creak, he enters one of the rooms illuminated by the rays of a karaoke ball. There are 3 girls sitting in the room, dressed in school uniforms. Jess, clearly dissatisfied with something, sits in silence and crosses her arms over her chest, while her friends cheerfully sing. The guy who came in a loud voice, informs Jess that the guys from the next room consider them cuties and offer to relax together. Jess continues to sit silently and dissatisfied. He, apparently expecting such a reaction, begins to persuade, saying that they already gave them free soda and extra karaoke time, and that they just need to sit with those guys for a couple of minutes. But again, not seeing the reaction he needed, he suddenly and abruptly grabs Jess by the hand and pulls her out from behind the table. She angrily mutters to herself about some loser that he has no balls, since he can't call them himself. Abruptly, Jess breaks down and moves on to the guy standing next to her. She shouts at him so that the loser does not even hope and hits him hard in the groin. The stunned guy falls to the floor and looks up pityingly. Jess puts her hands on her waist, showing her superiority with all her appearance, and explains that she is the ex-girlfriend of Bao Gao, the strongest in ancient Chinatown. She rudely tells him to go and tell him that if he is better than her ex, then let him come and get acquainted himself, otherwise let him go to hell. Staggering, the guy got up and headed towards the exits. Jess was still glaring after him angrily. Anger faded into the background. Jess was sweating from such an active dialogue. She unbuttoned her blouse and invited her friends to sing something to distract themselves. After leaving the room, the guy felt depressed. He walked along and muttered to himself with displeasure that she was no longer dating Bao, but was still using his name. Suddenly he heard footsteps. A boy was walking down the corridor and humming to himself. When he passed by, he began to ask in a raised tone how he got here and for him to get out. The boy shuddered and, pretending that he did not understand, asked why he could not come here. The karaoke worker was enraged by such impudence, pointing and waving his hands, began to shout that he was constantly getting into fights with his visitors, and on his first visit he broke the TV altogether. The boy made a cute face, and calling him a brother, tried to convey that he really came just to sing songs. He said he would try to leave as soon as possible. Because of this reception, the employee's face changed to a dirty one. But then he stopped abruptly. His heart began to beat very fast. He was scared and wondered what was wrong with him, because he was a guy. The employee, turning away in embarrassment, directed the boy to room 6, but warned him, let him only dare to leave ahead of time. The boy was obviously pleased with this. He headed down the corridor. But when he heard a beautiful singing at the 5th room, he joined the class. He saw 3 girls dancing, but Jess immediately took all his attention. The pretty boy was surprised how attractive she is, but she looks a little arrogant, but this only gives a special peppercorn. As he opened the door, he decided that she was his target for today. Going inside the room, he shouted cheerfully. He asked why the girls were sitting alone and noticed that it was not interesting at all. Jess, tired of dancing, plopped down on the sofa. Her friends stood in disbelief and looked at the guy. He sat down next to Jess, winked at her and, as always, making a cute face, asked if she would mind if he joined, because they would definitely not get bored with him. Jess's friends were amazed by the boy's cute appearance. They noticed that he was their type. And here's the moment, they're already having fun together. The guy sings, and Jess's friends are spinning next to him in the dance. In turn, Jess is still resting and enjoying a drink. At this time, a red-haired guy came to the door. He got mad when he saw Jess hanging out with some guy. He bursts into the room and shouts to the pretty boy that he was the first to look at her and how dare he cross his path. The red-haired man grabs him by the collar and offers to sort it out like a man. The cutie agrees. It makes the red-haired man laugh a lot. He says that it's not worth showing off in front of the girls. But suddenly he himself blushes from the cute appearance of the boy. Suddenly, the cutie's face changes. He grabs the hand of a cheeky guy and wrings it. The red-haired one was surprised and screams how he dared to push him. But then he gets an elbow right in the chest. The cheeky guy fell to the floor. The cutie smugly straightened his hair and noticed that his opponent had no strength at all. Barely getting up, the red-haired guy said that he would kill this bastard and he did not know who he was. Standing up, he swung and shouted that he was in the 10th place of the highest to Sukshu, and that he would soon overthrow Bao, and become the strongest dog in Ikan. A door swung open from behind. The red-haired man only had time to turn around, as the fist of the cutie bumps into his face. Blood gushed out of his nose, and the red-haired guy swung again and wanted to hit. But his hand was intercepted again. This time it was a guy who had recently entered. He turned to the pretty boy, calling him Harper Van, and handed him a piece of paper. A smile appeared on the face of the newcomer, more like a grin. He squeezed the red-haired guy's hand hard. Inside, the red-haired man screamed. He did not understand who he was and where he got so much power from. But fortunately for him, the guest casually released his hand and returned to Harper. The humiliated, impudent guy again burned with a desire for revenge. Shouting at the new enemy, he swung and struck. The hand did not reach the target again. The black-haired stranger dodged the blow as if he knew it would happen. The stranger grabbed the red-haired man and pulled him towards himself. Daring did not even have time to inhale, as a knee flies into his stomach. He exhaled heavily and sharply. A tear rolled down his face. The stranger turned to Harper, said that if he fights with such assholes, then you need to beat the shit out of them. Then they definitely won't bother. During his speech, he did what he beat the red-haired one, first hitting him on the top of his head, and then finally and at full speed pushing his head into the wall. The red-haired man fell to the floor in a puddle of his own blood and sighed heavily, and the black-haired stranger stood and looked at him with his terrifying smile. Everyone was surprised by what this black-haired guy did to him. The black-haired man headed for the exit of the room. Stopping at the door, he called Harper with him. A bright night street. A red bike with a black-haired guy and Harper rushes along the road. Harper presses hard against the stranger sitting in front. They stop before the traffic light. Harper says he's glad his father sent him a watchdog as a gift. After all, he had wanted a bodyguard for so long. His watchdog said that Harper can think as he wants, and he's just doing his job. He also asked Harper not to stick, because it's disgusting. The black-haired man asked if Harper was really a guy or if everyone here was wearing makeup. Harper slyly made eyes and decided to tease his doggy. Harper pressed hard against him, causing a blush to appear on the black-haired man's face. The black-haired man got very angry and shouted what he was doing. Turning and taking off his helmet, the black-haired man probably wanted to smack Harper, but turning Harper joined his lips. The black-haired man screamed sharply and asked, and Harper kept teasing, saying he didn't understand why he couldn't kiss him, because he had to mark what was his. The bodyguard looked at Harper with horror and embarrassment, and he did not calm down and said that he liked him. The guy slowly and aesthetically wipes his lips with his hand. He looks sharply at Harper and says with disgust and as if with contempt that really one kiss was not enough. Harper, still hoping for a continuation of the kiss, stands with his eyes closed and pulls his lips, asks if he wants to do it again. The guy is disgusted with this picture, puts his hand on his friend's head and pointedly turns away, asking him to remove his nasty face, which is just disgusting. The guy casually points his finger in his direction and says that he warns that he does not like it when others treat him like that. Orders him not to do that anymore. Harper looks lustfully and says with a grin that he does not understand what is the matter and that he can do anything he wants. But still, since his puppy asks, he will think about it. After looking at Harper again with displeasure, the guy repeats that he warned. He turns away, lowers the visor of his helmet and starts his red bike. The black-haired man, before turning away, said that he did not give anyone a second chance and that Harper could do as he knew. The green lights up. The black-haired man pushes the throttle handle and the bike quickly starts, getting on the rear wheel. This speed makes Harper very happy, and he shouts joyfully. There is a light on the first floor of a tall white building. Outside the door, there are sounds of blows and sighs. The red-haired guy was beaten with a bat on the 5th point by his brother. He was saying that how did this fool dare to hit on the former Balgua without his permission. The red-haired man tried to justify himself that he just wanted to avenge Bao for him, for taking the place of the strongest dog in northern Aiken. The brother kept shouting that he was crazy, that the red-haired one was nobody to oppose Bao. Finally, his brother said that Bao is not a man, but a monster, because he was able to get his hands on the northern and southern parts of Aiken in less than a week. A picture popped up in their thoughts, a hefty big man standing among a pile of bodies lying in blood. Bao is really dangerous. My brother sat down heavily on a chair and covered his face with his hand. He kept saying that he didn't understand who the fool thought he was. He looked at the red-haired man and asked if there were any Bao people there. He was told that they did not think so. Getting up, he said it was good. The red-haired one and some other kids stood and looked at the floor. The elder told them not to do this again. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the corridor. A healthy guy came into the hall. It was Sam, Bao's right-hand man. His job was to pass orders to Bao, punish people, and collect taxes. Sam said he had a message from Bao. He took the cross-haired brother by the throat and lifted him up. He said that there should be a reckoning for betrayal. Wheezing from suffocation, he began to justify himself that this was no betrayal. You'd think he hit on the former Bao Guyu. He said that his brother was still small and that he would take care of him. Sam pulled the poor guy to his face and said that he knew that the red-haired man thought he could become the strongest in Iken. Rolling his eyes, he added that lying carries even more punishment. Sam slowly swung, slapped the poor guy in the face. The blow was so strong that he immediately went limp, and blood sprayed in all directions. He casually let go of the limp body, and it fell senselessly to the floor and rolled a couple of meters. The brother of the red-haired man showed no signs of life, and the others, except Sam, of course, stood and looked with fear at the body, then at Sam himself. Sam looked in the direction of the small ones and said that from that day on, Suksu High School occupies the lowest place among the northern Iken, and their tax is doubled. Grinning, he turned away and slowly walked to the exit, warning that no one was given a second chance and that next time he might be ordered to kill them. The red-haired man runs up and tries to bring his brother to his senses, but it is clear from his lost face that it will not work. The red-haired man shouts that he will definitely take revenge. Sam turns around with a sneer and says that in order to get revenge, he must become stronger and find Bao. But first he will have to defeat him. Showing with all his appearance that the kid is pathetic, Sam says that if he has the guts, then they can fight at any time. Sam laughed loudly and expressively. A tall apartment building floods the street with light from the windows. Harper's joyful cry is heard from behind the door. The boss is surprised at how quickly Kyle was able to bring Harper, and that Hyper probably has nothing to worry about at school. Kyle replies indifferently that it doesn't matter at all and he'd rather rest. With this answer, he caused surprise among the boss and his subordinates. Kyle headed for the exit, but the boss said he needed to get ready for his school visit tomorrow. Kyle turns around and asks in disbelief if they're joking, because he doesn't even go to school. To which the boss says that because of the fight in the club, Harper was expelled. After looking at the boss, Kyle turns and, hanging his head in despair, begins to leave, and the boss continues to say that the watchdog should follow his master everywhere. The boss adds that he has heard that things are not going smoothly at Hong Jin High School, so Kyle should go. Hearing the name of the school, Kyle turns sharply and looks at the boss with horror. The boss wonders if even Kyle has heard of this school. Arrogantly lifting his chin, Kyle said that there is no person in Incheon who has not heard of her. There are only scum studying there. Adjusting his sunglasses, the boss noticed that there are scum not only from Incheon, but also from all over the country. It also seems that the Triad from Incheon, Sangsas from North Gyeonggi and Blue Dragons from South Gyeonggi are recruiting new gang members. There are a lot of fights going on. The boss approached Kyle and said in a confident tone that he was obliged to protect Harper. Closing his eyes with discontent, Kyle asked to stop repeating it to him. The boss told Kyle that he would be living in Didong, a city located opposite Hong Jin, and told Harper to show Kyle their house. Harper happily strode down the hall and called Kyle, saying that the puppy should follow him. Kyle turns around and hopefully asks if he's really going to live with him until graduation. Then, it dawned on him that this was not a joke and angrily shouted that they were doing terrible things. That night in Didong, Harper shows Kyle their new house. Harper explained that Dad wanted to give Kyle a room at the end of the corridor, but he insisted and they would live in 301 and 302. As he dialed the door code, Harper was feigning surprise that Kyle didn't want to live closer to him. Entering the house, Harper called Kyle inside because he wants to see his room. Walking down the hall, Harper told me that Dad had arranged the room to his liking. At that moment, a guy bumped into Harper with his shoulder. Harper curled his lips in displeasure and looking after the offender said that it hurt. Kyle immediately found himself on the street with a wild desire to teach the assholes a lesson. He shouted at them to stop. The guys, not understanding how someone dared to call out to them, turned around and looked gloomily at Kyle. Kyle repeated his words with obvious anger in his voice, ordering them to stop. One of the guys turned around with a misunderstanding and asked if Kyle was crazy. With a haughty face, the same guy stood up in a relaxed pose and waved his hand impressively, telling Kyle to stop showing off in front of his boyfriend and get out, because they are from the highest Hong Jin. The second guy turned to a friend with a sneer, telling him to score, because Kyle would still end up in the hospital if he didn't stop climbing to the guys from Hong Jin. The first one spat at Kyle's feet and, indignant, was about to leave. Kyle said in the same unwavering voice that he was repeating to the guys for the last time and they should apologize. One of the guys becomes enraged and rushes at Kyle screaming. He launches his fist right into Kyle's face. There is a dull sound of impact, but Kyle intercepted his hand right in front of his nose. The recently fierce guy loses all resolve from his face. He looks into Kyle's eyes in surprise. In them he sees all the same calmness and steadfastness. Kyle squeezes his hand tighter and rings his fist with force. Sweat and a grimace of pain immediately appeared on the guy's face. But Kyle kept pushing. The guy screamed in pain and ended up on his knees. Kyle was looking at him with a sinister smile. Kyle notices that the kid is screaming very loudly and that the more he yells, the more scum will find out about him. With that sinister expression on his face, Kyle continued to press his hand, saying that the more people know about him, the more they will be afraid, which means it will be easier for him to protect Harper. Kyle pressed the poor guy's hand even harder and began to mockingly tell him to scream more, even louder. A long and nasty scream resounded throughout the entire block of the night, but brightly burning city. The second guy watched with apprehension as Kyle tormented his friend. Abruptly shouting that Kyle was a freak, the guy ran at him. The guy hits with all his strength, but the blow whizzes through the air. Kyle was able to dodge with ease. In the process of the slope, Kyle looks at the boy with hatred and appraisingly and makes a sharp dive. The top of Kyle's head at full speed and with a whoosh crashes into the jaw of a high school greyhound. Blood splattered to the side, and the high school student flew back. Kyle stands and arrogantly examines the body that has fallen to the ground. The first guy kneels behind Kyle. He begins to pronounce apologies with difficulty, saying that they will never catch his friend's eye again. The guy begged for forgiveness. Kyle kept looking at the guy sitting on his lap, thinking to himself that they were all animals and that they would definitely tell their gang about him. In his head, he came to the conclusion that until they met someone stronger, they would run away with their tails between their legs at the sight of Kyle. But Kyle has one problem. He's being watched by some guys at the end of the alley. He looks back cautiously, without turning around. These guys are clearly from the same gang as these. If they are lower in rank, they will forget about it. But if they are higher, they will definitely come back for Kyle to take revenge. Kyle had a big smile on his face. His heart hadn't been beating so hard for a long time. Abruptly, Harper gently grabbed Kyle's arm and gently pulled him towards himself. Harper spoke happily, glad that his puppy stood up for him. Kyle pulled his hand away and screamed at Harper not to dare touch him. Harper put his arm around Kyle again and pressed against his arm. Taking Kyle into the house, Harper said with a sly smile that he knew what Kyle liked and he would cook him delicious tteokbokki according to his signature recipe. A red-haired guy was standing at the end of the alley, talking on the phone. He mockingly said that a very interesting guy had moved to their city. At the end of the conversation, he abruptly lowered the timbre of his voice and said that Bao and Sam would be very interested in learning about him. Bright sunny morning. The action begins at Hong Jin High School. From the outside it looked like a decent school, but inside everything is much worse. There is a tense situation in class 1-9. All the dregs of this class are stone-faced and silently waiting for the lesson to begin. All the faces of the students of this school have stone and evil faces, and only arrogance and pride can be read in their eyes. The door to the classroom opens loudly. The darkly dressed Kyle enters first, looks at the sitting students from under his brows with displeasure. He immediately gathers the attention of all the scum. They look at him with arrogant defiance. With a look full of confidence and detachment, Kyle begins to make his way inside the classroom. Harper silently follows him. All the scum immediately got up from their seats and blocked the passage, appraisingly and proudly examining the newcomers who had recently entered. Walking along the desks, Kyle argues that if you drive all the dogs that got into the senior Hong Jin, they will not immediately show their teeth, but first build their defense. Approaching the desk he needed, he came to the conclusion that all the students trapped in this school are wild dogs. After briefly looking at an empty desk, Kyle takes up a chair to push it away, but someone's sneaker abruptly rests against it. Kyle examines the student who dared to do this, and then only looks back proudly with pleasure. Suddenly, the chair flies to another part of the classroom, and this guy starts aggressively pointing and shouting that this is his place, and that Kyle should get out. Kyle thinks it seems like it's already started. Harper looks calmly at Kyle. Harper lowers her face, grabs Kyle's elbow and offers to just sit in another place. Not agreeing with Harper's suggestion, Kyle continues to stand and defiantly look at this garbage. Kyle reflects that this jerk chose the weakest looking one to prove to the others that he is worth something. The guy continues to stare defiantly at Kyle and shouts that what the hell is he staring at him for. Kyle concludes that he wants to make a scapegoat out of him. After all, if he loses, then all the hyenas will run to him and it will be more difficult for him to protect Harper. Besides, Kyle is not a fan of embarrassing himself. Kyle abruptly and casually knocks Harper's hand off, says he doesn't care and continues to stand still. Scum, feeling his vague superiority, continues to press Kyle, asking if he is a local because he speaks very funny. A haughty grin stretches across the scum's face. Kyle says he just grew up in Siberia, grew up in the Primorsky territory and hunted tigers there. The trash walks around Kyle, leans on his shoulder and sarcastically says that this can't happen. How such a manner of conversation can appear because of the tigers. The trash leans into Kyle's ear and says threateningly that he thinks Kyle is a foreign asshole with a funny accent who is trying to piss him off. Kyle, without flinching a muscle on his face, asks the trash to move away because he stinks from his mouth. Surprised by such impudence, the trash begins to get angry. He swings and says that Kyle apparently wants to die. With all his might, the asshole prescribes a slap on the back of Kyle's head. The blow reaches the target and a ringing sound rushes through the class. Holding Kyle's head, the asshole bends down and slowly, through his teeth, says that Kyle really pisses him off. The rest of the assholes in the class look at this picture arrogantly and quite. Harper looks at Kyle with excitement. With one sharp blow of his elbow, Kyle knocks off the hand of the impudent scum and turns to face him. Fear abruptly appeared on the scum's face. Kyle defiantly asks the asshole to hit him, says that everyone is looking at and isn't that what he wanted. With the same unwavering face, Kyle firmly and loudly asks the trash to attack. Gradually bending under the iron character of Kyle, the discard hesitantly takes a step back and asks what kind of nonsense Kyle is talking about. But Kyle does not let him finish. With a smile on his face, he pushes the garbage with his forehead into his chest and with feigned surprise asks what happened to him and why he does not attack. Feeling the reaction to his words, Kyle very timely and abruptly takes a step back. At this time, the trash screams at the top of his voice how dare Kyle lean on him, and hits Kyle with all his might. But the blow does not have time to reach its destination, because Kyle managed to be the first to hit the garbage right in the face with all his might. The dull sound of a blow replaces the silence in the classroom. With a proud face and mockery in his voice, the garbage asks what it was, not that Kyle hit him, but suddenly blood splashes on his hand. Surprised, the trash raises his hand to his face and realizes that it is his blood. Angered so much that even the veins swelled on his temples, the garbage begins to move towards Kyle and says that he will definitely kill him. Screaming, he swings and flies at full speed towards Kyle, while he stands calmly and keeps his hands in his pockets, not feeling any danger at all. Thanks to his excellent reaction, Kyle sees the blows of the garbage as if in slow motion. Kyle makes a sharp lunge to the side, again dodging a blow to the end of the furious garbage. Kyle, without thinking twice, hits the garbage in the jaw at full speed and with all his strength. Something crunched very loudly. Recently, a greyhound, full of anger and self-confidence, throws his head back and flies to the floor. Blood splatters on the floor. Kyle, proudly looking down at the work done, calmly passes next to the lying body. He impressively walks past the students staring at him, because he knows that after such a thing, no one will dare even say a word to him. Kyle pushes back his chair and sits down with a sense of accomplishment. He looks at the enthusiastic and amazed Harper. Kyle asks why Harper is standing there and not sitting down. Kyle pushes back the second chair and says that now the place next to him is always his. Harper cautiously approaches and sits down at his desk. Next to his watchdog, he feels safe. Harper turns to Kyle and says it's very scary here. He worries that everyone is looking at him and whether they will be alright. Kyle looks with his unwavering gaze at the scum staring at them. In normal schools, after this, the hierarchy has already been established, but not here. The scum with grins and defiance in their eyes look at them as their prey, but still, they won't climb for a while. The door opens with a bang. A big guy appears in the aisle. All the attention from Harper and Kyle immediately switches to the door. The trash walks into the classroom, slams his hands on the table with a bang and shouts why the assholes are staring at him. He keeps shouting that he is Brett Moon, the strongest at the Gwangjin school in Seoul, and they should show him their respect. The trash loudly asks who is the strongest in their class. Kyle did not expect this, due to the fact that the senior Hong Jin is being thrown off from all over the country. There is a completely different atmosphere here. Kyle bends forward and a satisfied grin appears on his face. School life promises to be interesting for him. Surprised by the arrogance of the scum, Brett looked down on the class, believing that they were all weaklings and simply pretending to be cool. Silence still reigned in the classroom. The rest of the scum were still looking at Brett, who came into the classroom with arrogance. A satisfied grin appeared on Kyle's face. He noticed that Brett was different from that guy. That trash was looking for the weakest. Brett was looking for the strongest. The situation became even more tense. Brett continued to look down on the students, seeming to understand that he would not wait for an answer to his question. Brett, without turning his head, looked with determined eyes for the strongest in the class, visually and mentally assessing everyone. When Brett began to inspect the garbage, each of them had a satisfied grin, pleased that they are challenging Brett, albeit visually. The situation was heating up. Then Brett's eyes widened. He turned his head sharply and saw Kyle sitting at the end of the class. Kyle had a scary expression on his face, scary, but eerily pleased. Kyle mentally screamed how glad he was that he knew Brett would find him. The silence in the classroom abruptly began to fill with someone's calm steps. Kyle looked away in surprise and incomprehension to examine this brave man. A guy was walking along the desks with a calm smile on his face. Kyle looked at his back with displeasure. The guy walked up to the desk where Brett was sitting and began to look at him with interest. Brett didn't notice him and was looking at something to the side. Then this guy laughed at the whole class. He asked with joy and, it seems, with kindness in his voice, "Is it really Brett?" With a smug face, the guy said that he was expelled from Brett's school back in middle school. Then he was his high school student. The guy was glad to meet someone from the old school. He said they could be friends and held out his hand. Still believing in his authority in front of Brett, the guy bent down to him and said that he would help him with school life and guide him. Brett turned his gaze on the guy and asked with anger in his voice, "So what?" The guy's expression immediately changed. Sweat broke out on his temples. With fear, he looked at Brett questioningly. Brett, with a stony face, looked at the guy with all the anger. He asked what he cared about the fact that he studied with him at the same school. Brett, with a furious face, looked at the guy and shouted that they were no longer at school in Seoul. He said that now they are in the higher Hong Jin, and this is a completely different world. The guy scratched his head uncertainly and said in a noticeably quieter voice that he just wanted to make friends. Brett arrogantly turned away and said that if he wanted to make friends, then let him carry his bag and not think that it was better just because he was older. Continuing to scratch the back of his head uncertainly, the guy sighed and agreed in a trembling voice. He probably imagined himself to be Brett's brother, but turned out to be his errand boy. What a shame. Brett continued to look at Kyle sitting at the end of the class. Kyle's satisfied smile reappeared on his face. Kyle confidently stood up from his desk. Harper noticed this and looked at Kyle with excitement. Harper, startled, grabbed Kyle by the arm and asked him to sit still, because he shouldn't do it. Kyle silently looked down at Harper. He explained to Harper that he had to protect him, and to do that he had to be strong. He said that you gain strength when you prove it to others, so now is the time to show it. Harper continued to look at Kyle with excitement. He sighed and, touched, asked if Kyle was doing this for him. A scarlet flush appeared on Harper's face. Thoughts swirled in Harper's head. He likes it. Kyle walked calmly and steadily towards his prey. Brett watched him unflinchingly. The scum in the class made a fuss. They began to mock that this upstart wanted to show himself again. They came to the conclusion that this time it will not be so easy for Kyle, because his opponent is the strongest dog from school in Seoul. Kyle was walking towards Brett, looking unwaveringly into his eyes. Brett raised his hand to his face and thought. Brett leaned on his arm and looked at Kyle with a haughty face. Brett said that Kyle had balls of steel. Brett was looking at Kyle with interest, who didn't look as strong as he seemed. He went on to say that usually everyone gets scared when they hear his name. Brett was even interested. Brett approvingly said that before he entered the classroom, he saw Kyle knock out that guy and that if after that he thought he was strong, then it was better for Kyle to return to his place. Brett tensed all the muscles of his face, the veins on his temples bulged, and began to stare intently at Kyle, waiting for a response. Kyle, without flinching a single muscle of his body, said that they would still see who would return to his place, because only one would stand. Kyle smugly remarked that he had never missed his prey, that this was his territory, and Brett was his prey. Looking haughtily at Brett, Kyle lowered the timbre of his voice and slowly asked if Brett understood him. Brett stood up resolutely, a satisfied smile on his face. Abruptly, Brett launches his crushing punch into Kyle's face. This time Kyle didn't have time to react. Consciousness went into his heels for a second, but immediately came back. Kyle rubbed his chin, where the blow had just gone, and just as emotionlessly looked at Brett as if nothing had happened. Surprised, but enough that he found a strong opponent. Brett was surprised. Kyle was the first who stood on his feet after his blow. Kyle continued to nag Brett with his gaze. Kyle replied that Brett was the first person in Korea who was able to punch him in the face. Fired up by these words, Brett cracked his fingers and said that if so, he would be the first to knock him out. Shouting furiously that he would show why no one could beat him, Brett struck a second time. This time Kyle saw and calculated all the slightest movements of the greyhound asshole, so he definitely could not miss this blow. Brett suddenly felt fear. He was scared because his fist did not reach the target, and Kyle was right next to him, preparing for a retaliatory blow. Kyle immediately grabbed Brett's head and, at full speed, with all the force and inertia of his body, hit Brett from the knee into the nose. Blood sprayed in different directions. Brett immediately dropped out of consciousness. His unconscious body tipped over backwards and flew down. Brett, covered in blood, collapsed on his desk. The desk could not withstand his heavy weight and broke in half. Brett's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. Arrogantly examining the fallen victim, Kyle repeated that Brett was the first in Korea who was able to hit him in the face, because they were already lying on the floor as Brett was lying now. There was an ominous silence in the classroom. Everyone silently and in surprise looked at the defeated Brett, and the desks scattered to the sides. The whole situation, looking out of the classroom window, was watched by a group of some guys. All the scum around them, looking at them, fell into horror. These guys began to slowly leave, moving along the corridor. The surrounding people looked at their backs with fear. As they walked, everyone in the corridor lined up along the walls so as not to accidentally bump into them. One of them was talking on the phone, explaining that Chris was calling. He told someone that Kyle, about whom he was talking, appeared at their school and beat the first recruit of their organization and something needs to be done with him. Chris offered options for action, saying that he could be shut up, recruited, but significantly lowering his voice. He added that he thought it would be better to kill him. Chris arranged to meet on the roof by phone, and the guys went there. The dean entered the classroom and leaned on the desk. Her strong hands gripped the desk tightly, so much so that the veins on them swelled. Glaring angrily at the class, she said in her steely voice that she was not going to explain anything, because everyone knows about the reputation of Hong Jin High School, into which all the scum of the country are thrown. She said that Class 10-9 consists of those who were expelled from previous schools and that Hong Jin gives them one last chance. Everyone in the class listened intently. The school could turn a blind eye to some things, but if they give up at least once, they will regret it. The dean conveyed this idea to everyone very clearly. Looking at the dean, who was huge and pleased that everyone was afraid of her, Harper carefully whispered to Kyle that she was called a white dog and that she had once broken a student's arm. Harper abruptly straightened up and sat up straight. He whispered to Kyle that she was looking right at them, and fell silent. Collecting her documents, the dean peered at each sitting student. Kyle, as always, calmly turned around and told Harper that there was nothing to be afraid of, because she was an ordinary person. Summing up her speech, the dean said that from the next lesson, the headman would call everyone to the dean's office one by one for a personal conversation. Haughtily, as if showing her superiority, she looked at the girl sitting on the first desk and temporarily appointed her headman. She agreed good-naturedly, as if she had a choice. The bell rang. The students relaxed and went about their business. Of course, after such a tense monologue, the dean needed to rest. Kyle and Harper sat quietly at the desk and stared at her without an emotional look. The girl who was appointed temporary headman came up to them. Harper drew attention to her. The girl leaned over and greeted Harper sweetly. Harper recognized her. It was Carol Yu. Harper jumped up from his seat and they hugged happily. He said he was glad that she was also transferred to this school. Carol sat down in the next chair. He and Harper talked happily, remembering that this was their first meeting since the incident. Harper said he was very happy that they were in the same class. Carol was also happy about it. Saying this to Harper, they both smiled good-naturedly. Kyle was still sitting in silence, but then he asked who she was. The girl emotionally asked Kyle the same question. Harper gave Kyle a smug look and said his daddy had hired him a bodyguard. Kyle sighed in despair. Harper decided to introduce them. He said that this was his best friend Carol. They were very close in the last school. They got into trouble together, and that's why they were expelled. Harper added that Carol lived nearby, so she has a lot of friends at this school. She could be useful to them. The girl agreed with Harper, rolled her eyes, crossed her arms over her chest, and asked Kyle to be nice to her. Carol called Harper into the dining room because there would soon be a queue there. Harper agreed, and they headed for the exit. Kyle sat for a couple of seconds and also got up. Two guys were standing at the exit, laughing and discussing a white dog, with its very muscular arms and pimples, which attacks the students like a warthog. The face of one of the guys was filled with anger. He blocked Harper's way and defiantly asked what he was staring at. The second scum supported his friend and asked what Harper needed. Harper's face paled and sweat broke out on his temples. Carol hid behind him in fright. Suddenly, Kyle's big palm appeared in the doorway and froze for a second at the head of one of the scum. Kyle came out and with his strong hands, abruptly and forcefully, pushed the scum standing in the doorway. The greyhound of the pair loudly and angrily asked what kind of freak did that. Turning around, the trash immediately fell silent. Kyle was looking at him, and his friend was already shaking with fear. Kyle asked what they had against what he needed to go through. With fear in their eyes, the dregs parted in the corners. Nervously scratching the back of his head, the trash replied that he didn't mind and that the door was shared, which meant Kyle could pass. Carol exclaimed that they had to hurry, because they were late. He and Harper ran. Kyle stood and reasoned. He knocked out 2 of the class 10-9, showing his strength. While Harper and Carol were running happily, all the scum in the corridor were looking at them with anger and ridicule. Everyone looked at Kyle standing in the hallway. Kyle doesn't know how much longer his class will be afraid of him. But the main problem is that he doesn't know what kind of types study in other classes. With their noses up high, contorting smug faces, the dregs of the Hong Jin school looked at Kyle with burning eyes, considering him their victim. Kyle closed his eyes and exhaled heavily, as if he was back in the forests of Primorsky Krai. And he was alone again. In Kyle's mind, he remembered the cold night, the bright moon, and the wild animals looking with their bloodthirsty eyes. In a region where the temperature reaches -30, the strongest survives. Kyle thought again of the wolves with bloodshot eyes. Kyle's eyes sparkled with nostalgia and a pleasant feeling. He voluntarily came to a place full of wild animals. There was a small queue in the canteen building. Everyone was animatedly discussing what they wanted for lunch. The good-natured saleswoman with a kind smile handed Kyle 2 hot ramen. It smells very tasty. Harper and Carol sat down at the table and were about to enjoy their ramen when Carol exclaimed in surprise and looked at another table. Carol nudges Harper and asks him to look at Kyle. Harper, surprised, turns his attention to another table. Kyle sits alone at the table and silently eats his bread. However, not surprisingly, he has always been aloof. Carol's face changes to a dirty one. A smile and a scarlet blush appear on her face. She says Kyle is cute and exactly her type. Carol stops talking and continues to look at Kyle. Harper is happily supportive. He also thinks Kyle is a hot thing. Harper's words abruptly unsettle Carol. She tells him that sometimes he behaves incorrectly. Carol throws her head back and begins to think. She can't say that Harper doesn't like girls, because he's already hooked up with one at the club. Carol slyly and sharply asked Harper if he was bisexual. Harper paled at the question, and he turned and looked at Carol. Then Harper looked down. A blush appeared on his face. He embarrassedly said that he was not gay, but meant that if he was a girl, then Kyle would be to his liking. Carol bent down to Harper's face, slyly narrowing her eyes. Carol asked if Harper was hiding something from her. Harper exclaimed, startled, that he wasn't. Carol stood up confidently, looked at the embarrassed Harper with a smile and said that it was great and Kyle was hers now. Harper's eyes suddenly widened, and there was panic in them. He looked at Carol walking with a confident gait. Kyle sat unsuspectingly and washed down the eaten bun with juice. Carol came over and put her arm around him and lay on his shoulder. Kyle stopped drinking, looked sideways at a satisfied Carol and asked what she was doing. Making a cute face, Carol pulled herself up to Kyle's face and in a charming voice invited Kyle to eat ramen with them. Because you won't be satisfied with bread alone, she even offered him to eat her portion. Kyle continued to sit without emotion, when suddenly someone approached him from behind. Carol grunted with displeasure, because her attempt at a tackle would probably be ruined. 3 guys came up to their table. They asked if he was the same Kyle. Kyle looked at them in surprise. One of the guys was familiar to Kyle. It was the trash he knocked out first. The guy with yellow hair asked if Kyle knocked out his friend. He introduced himself as the strongest dog from class 10-1. The third supported the acquaintance and called himself the strongest dog from class 10-2. The dog from 10-1 says with a grin, did Kyle run away from class and decided to hide in the cafeteria? Suddenly, he forcefully leans his foot on the table. Ramen falls to the floor. Someone screamed in surprise. Kyle was still calm and unwavering in his seat. Angrily, the dog from 10-1 bent down to Kyle's face and asked where he wanted to solve the issue, in the dining room or on the street. Kyle, as if not noticing the garbage, continued to sit quietly and reflect on the fact that all the wild dogs hiding in the classrooms are slowly beginning to show themselves. It's even good. Today Kyle will get his hands on all the second grades. Kyle stood up abruptly. The dregs flinched in surprise and stared at him. All the students in the dining room were bustling. There was a commotion in the dining room. Someone shouted that a fight was starting. The students surrounded Kyle and the 3 dregs. The scum looked at Kyle with malice, apparently not feeling the danger. Very wrong. Kyle tilted his head a little to the side, slowly waved his hand at himself and in his own manner, said that they could attack him 3 together. Kyle offered them a fight. Kyle stood up resolutely, confidently looking at his prey, in the face of 3 scum. The students surrounding them in the dining room began to loudly discuss what was happening. More and more students surrounded Kyle and the three guys. They all discussed that Kyle had no chance of winning against three, especially the strongest of 10-1 and 10-2. Some guy looked down on Kyle and asked if he thought Kyle would lose to two of the strongest dogs, and even 3 against 1. Brett, standing next to him, looked at this guy and began to reflect that he did not think that Kyle would lose, even if they surrounded him with the 3 of them. Continuing to calmly peer at Kyle, Brett noticed that compared to those 3 dogs, Kyle looks much calmer. And indeed, Kyle stood calmly and looked at the garbage without an emotional look, keeping his hands in his pockets. It was obvious from him that he had not lost his fortitude, and these 3 were just showing off. The 3 dregs continued to press on Kyle, feeling the advantage, because there are 3 of them. Brett came to the conclusion that he did not yet know how this fight would end, but noticed that Kyle was so fearless that his calmness was even frightening. But still, Brett believes that Kyle will win. Shouts and loud conversations could be heard even outside the dining room. Such a noise could not be unnoticed. The dean calmly walked down the street and ate bread. Passing by the dining room, she saw crowded students in the window. It seems she was interested in it. She recognized them. They were guys from 10-9. They had been calm lately and now it started again. An evil smile appeared on her face. She said that what a charm they were, young and big cuties. Behind the 3 dregs, Kyle saw the outline of a very familiar figure in the window, even if it wasn't her. But when he saw her completely, he realized it was the dean. Kyle could easily knock out the 3 of them, because they came under the pretext of revenge. But he knows that they came just to show their strength and get their hands on 10-9. Sweat broke out on Kyle's face. His plans were falling apart. He could get his hands on half of the sophomore classes right now, but becoming a regular in the dean's office would limit his ability to defend Harper. Looking back at Harper, he realized that he needed to decide everything right now, whether to fight them right now or later. The strongest dog from 10-1 shouted furiously to Kyle to stop staring at him like that and swung hard. Hit. Kyle easily dodged, but still not without damage. The discard grazed his nose. But that wasn't what surprised Kyle. Kyle, shocked, looked out the window. But he was shocked not by the blow, but by the fact that the dean calmly turned around and left. He realized that this was his chance. After leaving, the dean with an angry voice said that the boys should continue, because now is the time. Her fist clenched hard. Kyle, confident in himself, made a lunge to have a big foothold and moved to the trash to make a retaliatory strike. But something held his action down. 2 friends smugly held Kyle's hands and did not let him move. Chuckling, they asked him not to forget about them. Kyle's face wrinkled with anger. He imagined everything quite differently. He had a bad feeling. The strongest dog from 10-1 was already flying at Kyle at full speed. He shouted furiously for Kyle to taste his uppercut. The blow went through a vast area of the chin. Blood splashed to the side, and a dull sound of a blow sounded in the dining room. The blow was strong. The discard hit the right place. Kyle's consciousness left him and he fell to the floor. Everyone was looking at the fallen Kyle enthusiastically. The strongest dog from 10-1 squatted down, complacently and arrogantly looking at the lying Kyle. He said that he was an ordinary loser. His friends enthusiastically discussed that the dog from 10-1 had definitely dislocated his jaw. The 3 scum headed for the exit. The crowd parted in front of them. Passing through the students, they showed off that no one had survived Sean's uppercut yet, and he even took 2nd place in national boxing competitions. The dregs have dealt with the most problematic class 10-9. Now the high school students will definitely take care of them. Suddenly the whole crowd screamed again. Kyle began to rise. The dregs turned around in confusion and could not believe what they had heard. The dregs turned around. They were completely confident of their victory. Kyle stood up to them. Suddenly, Kyle makes a sharp lunge and launches his punch right into the face of the strongest dog from 10-1. The sound of the blow fills the dining room. The friends of the garbage did not have time to blink an eye as their friend tipped over backwards and fell heavily to the floor. His slipper flew up to the ceiling. The strongest dog from 10-2, shouting enthusiastically, rushed at Kyle. Kyle immediately reacted to this and prepared to take the hit. Kyle managed to react and intercepted the garbage. Kyle hit him in the stomach with all his might, causing him to bend. The face of the dog from 10-2 was filled with pain. He thought that he had been turned inside out. It was so painful. He fell senseless to the floor. Blood gushed from his mouth. Kyle turned around and looked at the guy he knocked out this morning. He was shaking with fear. Carol exclaimed enthusiastically that Kyle had defeated 3 at once and asked Harper to watch. Harper was in shock. He didn't think Kyle was that strong. Kyle ignored the 3rd discard and went to the body of the dog from 10-1 lying on the floor. The The dog from 10-1 was lying, showing no signs of life. Kyle stepped on his hand with force, from which the dog immediately woke up. Multicolored lights sparkled in front of his eyes. He still hadn't moved away from a strong knockout. Kyle looked into Tom's eyes with a stony stare. The discard was now shaking all over with fear, and averted his eyes from Kyle. Kyle came to the conclusion that there was no point in hitting a guy who didn't want to fight anymore. It's over. Kyle took his foot off the asshole's arm and said that if he didn't want to embarrass himself even more, then let him not get up and lie down like that until the end of lunch. Glancing at the third guy, whom he knocked out first in the morning, he warned in a steely voice that if he didn't want to be beaten, he had to get out. The guy shook with fear and stared at Kyle in horror, trying to digest what he heard as much as possible. Realizing that he was being given a chance to leave, he turned around and ran screaming out of the dining room. The students in the dining room cheered. Kyle managed to get his hands on 3 classes in such a short period. It was a new record. The strongest dog from 10-1 began to struggle to get up. He wiped the blood from his face and admitted that Kyle was very strong. But their fight was not over yet. The dog reached into his pocket to get his trump card in this battle. Taking the knife out of his pocket, he licked it contentedly and felt the confidence begin to saturate his body. Shouting furiously for Kyle to die, the stronger dog 10-1 ran after Kyle, who was leaving the dining room. Kyle turned his head sharply and saw an idiot rushing at him with a knife in his hands. The strongest dog from class 10-1, shouting enthusiastically, ran at Kyle with a knife. All the students watching this were shocked. The crowd was buzzing loudly and it was difficult to make out at least some words, but Brett was able to shout over everyone. He shouted at Kyle to be careful because he had a knife. Kyle, hearing Brett, turned around sharply, but did not have time to react. The stabbing grazed Kyle's cheek and left a small cut. Complacently twirling a knife in his hands, the strongest dog from 10-1 shouted for Kyle to attack or he would rip his stomach open. The dog struck again. Kyle's heart beat wildly, driving the blood through his body. Kyle made a slope to the side, moved to the front with a quick jerk and found himself in the face of a dog from 10-1. The strongest dog from 10-1 did not even have time to react. Seeing Kyle so close, fear appeared in his eyes. Kyle took the dog firmly by the wrist of the hand in which he held the knife. Kyle pulled the dog's hand towards him and held the knife to his throat. Without letting go of the dog's hand so that he could not remove it, Kyle said in a firm and confident voice that he cut. Kyle shouted furiously that since he threatened to cut open his stomach, so let him cut and quickly. Kyle said he knew the dog had never cut anyone before. Kyle continued his monologue while the confused dog stood and looked at his hand. Kyle kept telling him to cut. The tip of the sharp knife touched Kyle's neck. A thin trickle of blood flowed down his neck. Seeing this, the dog fell into a stupor. The dog's hand shook violently. He could no longer hold the knife in his hands. His hand began to gradually lower and finally, the knife fell to the floor. The dog looked down at the floor in confusion and fear. Kyle said he was just a kid because he wasn't a man, since he couldn't answer for his words. Without letting the dog come to his senses, Kyle hit the dog right in the face with all his strength. Blood splashed in different directions. From such a crushing blow, the dog immediately rolled his eyes and sighed, tipped over backwards. His unconscious body fell to the floor. Kyle repeated his words again that if the dog does not want Kyle to beat him again, then let him lie there until the end of the call. Otherwise, he will not be well. The crowd of students was shocked. The transferred student knocked out 3 at once. Carol jumped happily, and Harper breathed a sigh of relief. The speakers hanging on the wall said that there were 10 minutes left until the end of lunch, and that all students should go to their classes and get ready for the next lesson. Harper pulled Kyle along. He excitedly asked Kyle to go with him, because it's only their first day, and he's already in trouble. Kyle jerked his hand away. He told Harper to go by himself, and he had one more thing to do. Harper looked after Kyle with surprise. He did not understand what else he could of such a case. There is not a single student in the corridor. Everyone is sitting in their offices and waiting for the lesson to begin. Kyle confidently walks down the empty corridor. Kyle approaches the door of class 10-3 and pulls on the door handle. The door opens quickly and noisily. The dregs from class 10-3 looked discontentedly in the direction of the opening door, but Kyle appeared there. Kyle stuck only his head in the classroom and asked if there were people in it who were against Kyle taking over class 10-3. The strongest dog of class 10-3 was horrified when he heard this, but he could do nothing and submissively lowered his head into the textbook. Without waiting for an answer to his question, Kyle realized that this class was also his now, and loudly closed the door. Kyle walked up to class 10-4 and opened the door. The strongest dog sitting on the first desk looked at the doorway with displeasure. Kyle walked into the classroom and approached their strongest dog. The dog became nervous and fearfully lowered his head into the desk. Kyle grabbed the scum by the forehead and lifted his face up. Looking into the face of the trash, Kyle asked if he was the strongest dog from class 10-4. The garbage nervously began to mumble something. Kyle didn't want to waste any time, so he squeezed the trash's head hard and loudly demanded an answer to his question. The dog answered with fear that yes. Closing his eyes in fear, the dog shook. He told Kyle that he didn't want to fight him and that he didn't mind Kyle taking his place as the strongest dog of class 10-4. Kyle let go of the former strongest dog and headed out of the classroom. Before leaving, he turned around and said that since he didn't want to fight with him, then there was no need to stare at him and what the class 10-4 captures. Kyle walked calmly down the hallway. He captured grades 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, 10-4 and 10-9. He has only 5, 6, 7 and 8 left to capture. The bell for the lesson rang. The microphones hanging on the wall started talking again and said that all students should return to their classrooms. Kyle was on his way to capture the remaining high school classes. Starting tomorrow, he planned to start capturing the younger ones. In class 10-4, the former strongest dog was fidgeting nervously in his chair. He was quickly typing a message on his phone. The trash informed Chris that Kyle had taken over all the sophomore classes except 5, 6, 7 and 8, and that he couldn't stop him. In response, he received a message saying that all members of the second-year gang should skip class and urgently gather on the roof. A teacher came into class 10-4 and went to his workplace. He calmly looked around the classroom. The former strongest dog of this class raised his hand up. The teacher paid attention to him and asked with disbelief what he wanted. Garbage loudly said that he very urgently needed to go to the toilet and got up from his seat. The teacher sternly said that there was already a bell for the lesson. The dog replied that he needed to go to the toilet urgently and that he could not restrain himself. The dog looked reproachfully at the teacher and threatened that he would now do it right in the classroom. From surprise, the teacher fell into a stupor. Looking at the disgruntled teacher with a challenge, the dog threatened him that he was already taking off his pants. He reached for the belt on his pants. The teacher was even more horrified. The dog began to moan that he couldn't stand it anymore and was about to shit himself. The class burst into laughter. The dog stood and waited for the teacher's reaction. The teacher lifted his glasses and looked at him thoughtfully in response. They stared at each other. The teacher turned his eyes to his magazine and told the trash not to go anywhere else and come back as soon as possible. The dog got up and headed for the exit, and the teacher told the rest of the students in the class to open page 17. The dog opened the door of his classroom and stepped into the hallway. Other former strongest dogs of class 10-1 and 10-2 were already walking along it. He left the classroom and followed them. In class 10-9, the dean taught the lesson. She drew something on the blackboard and said that there was no difference between men and women, that the more developed the country, the less difference in education of the two sexes. She turned around, leaned on her desk and said that this is why it is impossible to discriminate against people on the basis of gender, but everyone should be accepted. She was interrupted by some student and exclaimed that it was some nonsense, and that he had not seen a woman who works at a construction site more than once. He also asked why only men work in dangerous jobs. Doesn't that prove sexism? A satisfied smile swept through the class, pleased that the student was able to catch the teacher. The dean suddenly yelled at them all to shut up, because they just have to memorize everything that is given in a textbook approved by the Ministry of Education. The students were shocked by this turn of events and fell silent. Having achieved her victory, the dean looked around the class with satisfaction. Brett was sitting quietly when he felt the vibration of his phone. He put his hand in his pocket. Groping for the phone, he took it out and peered at the screen. The guy from the next desk also received a message, and he reached for his phone. The message said that Brett and Hunter from class 10-9 went out and climbed to the roof of the school. Hunter leaned forward and whispered to Brett that they were being summoned. Hunter will go out first, and Brett will follow him. Brett looked at Hunter with his emotionless gaze, lifted his chin higher and tipped over on the back of his chair. Hunter was furious with this attitude towards himself. Gritting his teeth, he thought that he would not let Brett get away with it. He glared at Brett. Suddenly Hunter groaned loudly and longed for the whole class that he had a very bad stomach ache. Everyone in the class turned around in surprise and began to look at Hunter. The dean shifted her gaze to him with displeasure. She shouted angrily at Hunter, asking him what had happened. Hunter was on his stomach, sweat breaking out on his face. He pitifully asked to go to the infirmary, because the milk in the dining room had turned sour after all. Seeming to understand what was going on, The dean looked at Hunter with displeasure and asked if he was pretending. Hunter, feigning bouts of pain, quickly got up from his desk and loudly exclaimed that no. The dean calmly, but still harshly warned that if he left the school and returned drunk, she would kill him. Still holding his stomach, Hunter turned his head a little, trying to hide his anger in his eyes, because she was simply wasting his time. Pleased that she had made fun of the student, the dean chuckled and said that it was clear from his face that he needed to go out and asked him not to linger. Feigning a sick gait, bouts of pain and twisting his face, Hunter quickly walked around the classroom, hoping that she would not detain him anymore. After waiting for Hunter to hobble to the classroom door and finally get out, Brett stood up silently. The whole class paid attention to him. Brett came out from behind his desk and, with his hands in his pockets, walked calmly to the exit of the classroom. The dean noticed this and watched him go. Two students began to discuss what was happening and came to the conclusion that it seemed to them that high school students were being called, and if only good fighters were being called, then the Red Dragons had reopened the gang recruitment. The dean was furious at such impudence and tried to restrain her emotions, squeezing the edges of the desk with her fingers more and more. Veins bulged on her face. Walking past the last desk where Kyle and Harper were sitting, Brett looked at them out of the corner of his eye. When Brett reached the door, the dean suddenly exploded and shouted loudly for him to stop and where he was going. Not wanting to come up with excuses to get out, Brett turned to the dean and told him that he had the same thing as Hunter. The dean could not contain her emotions because of such brazen behavior towards her and, not believing Brett's words, shouted for him to answer the question. Sighing heavily, Brett asked the dean to stop asking so many questions because she infuriates him. He looked at him defiantly and said that if she wanted to punish him for wanting to go to the toilet, then he agreed to look at it. Brett, confident of his victory in this verbal confrontation, looked down at the dean with a challenge, a little from above, and waited for her answer. The dean lowered the volume of her voice and calmly said that taking care of her students is normal for teachers. Brett reached for the door and quickly slammed it open. He replied that he could take care of himself. Brett stepped into the hallway, but the dean said that as long as Brett is within the school, she is responsible for him. Brett stopped in the aisle, crossing her arms over her chest. The dean said with a malicious smile that she was trying to take care of what was in his pants. The dean said she was worried that Brett wouldn't hurt his delicate, clean skin. Brett was a little shocked by what he heard, but realized that this was his chance. All the students, hearing the dean's words, looked at her strangely, realizing that the teacher should not say such a thing. Brett turned his face and tried to answer something. Pulling himself together, Brett said in a calm voice that he could take this as a bad joke. Hearing Brett's phrase, a noise arose in the classroom, consisting of giggles and smirks. The students spun around, looking at Brett, then at the dean. Brett decided not to stop and added that he had heard some teachers at their school call male students young and big and also make obscene comments after them. Brett asked the dean if she was one of those teachers, too. The dean was horrified by what she heard. Her eyes widened and her teeth clenched. Brett, looking at her with the look of a hero, said that he could not close his eyes to such injustice, and that the only thing his father taught him was not to keep everything to himself and fight for what you think is right. Brett asked why the dean continued to behave badly. Giggling nervously, the dean waved her hand and said that this was some kind of misunderstanding and she did not understand why she would do such a thing. Realizing that she had nothing to say to Brett, she pulled herself together, lowered her gaze into the textbook and said that Brett could go to the toilet, and the others should open their textbooks. Brett, proud of his victory, went out and loudly closed the door behind him. The dean was furious that the student won the verbal altercation and glared at the door. He definitely won't get away with it. Harper turned to Kyle and whispered, so that the dean wouldn't hear, that he and Carol also drank milk at lunch. Harper asked if Kyle had been drinking milk and if he thought Brett was lying. Kyle calmly looked at Harper and said that soon they would find out if Brett really needed to go to the toilet or if he was hiding something. Harper, confused, asked what Kyle meant. Kyle, thoughtfully, replied that he suspected that a group of guys were preparing some shit against him to get rid of him. Harper exhaled with excitement. Kyle looked towards the door and said that 3 of the strongest dogs from the Red Dragons, who control all the others, would soon appear. Kyle added that he definitely needs to go and follow Brett to find out who these 3 strongest dogs are. The stairs of Hong Jin School. Many steps of the strongest dogs of the senior classes can be heard along the corridors. Chris and Sam are waiting on the roof for everyone to climb. Sam asked when Bao would be back at school. Chris replied that he thinks that Bao will not return soon, because if he is suspended again, he may be expelled and then it will be more difficult for him to do whatever he wants. Sam noticed that Bao has been cooling off for too long and it will soon be more difficult for them to manage them. Chris turned around and replied that Bao was busy with other things outside of school that would ensure their future, which meant that they needed to try while he was away. Chris leaned his back against the fence and said that since Bao is not there, it turns out that he trusts them. Sam averted his eyes and wondered what they would do now. Chris said, "We need to stop this Kyle. We can't let him take over all the junior classes." Sam looked at Chris and replied that they already had no one to use from the second courses, because half of them had already been destroyed. Chris knew that they had a trump card up their sleeve and cunningly said that they could use their alliance. Sam asked if Chris was referring to the second-ranked young school. Sam asked if they would help them even if Bao wasn't here. Crossing his arms over his chest, Chris said they could try to convince Young that their success would play into their hands. Sam, apparently not able to think and make plans at all, was surprised to ask how they would do it. Chris replied that they could exempt them from the tax for 3 months and guarantee them autonomy. Sam agreed that it sounded good. Chris slyly looked at Sam and said that Jang already knew what Bao was and it would not be easy for them to get rid of the fear of him, and they would throw them a big piece of meat, which they definitely would not refuse. Sam agreed with Chris, saying that their brain is Chris and he will just listen to him. Hearing footsteps on the stairs, Sam said to be quiet, because people had come. The bodies of high school students began to appear from the doorway. They got up and stood in front of Sam. Sam loudly asked if all the members of the second-year gang had come. Since everyone, he demanded a greeting from them. The dogs standing in 2 rows obediently bowed and loudly wished Chris and Sam a good day. The speakers on the wall started playing and informed the students that recess had begun and they could rest a little. Harper asked Carol what she thought was going on. A little confused about what exactly Harper was asking, Carol asked if it was about Brett and Hunter. Carol thought about it and replied that they usually meet on Wednesdays, but there are also urgent meetings here and there. There's probably an emergency meeting today because of Kyle. Harper looked anxiously at Carol and asked why. Carol enthusiastically replied that this was because rumors were spreading that Kyle had captured half of the second year, and they did not know when he would switch to high school students and decided to strengthen protection. Harper looked at Kyle and said he was a local star here now, and that was cool. Kyle just looked at him in response. Kyle was sitting with his feet up on the table. He asked if Harper had ever seen a tiger playing with cubs. Kyle added that he didn't care about them. Harper looked at Kyle excitedly and said he was only concerned about his safety. A blush appeared on Harper's face. Harper shyly averted his eyes to the side and also excitedly asked if Kyle was sure he could beat them. Looking down at Harper, Kyle said that he had never lost fighting in the woods, and it didn't matter who his opponent was, human or animal. Kyle turned away from Harper. Harper was amazed by Kyle's coolness, and in his head he would decide that he would take his watchdog's word for it. Meanwhile, on the roof, Sam explained that the reason they were all called together was very simple. Sam said that Young High School should help them in reining in a transferred student from class 10-9, Kyle Yun. Sam ordered the dogs to go to Young High School and tell them that they would exempt them from taxes for 3 months and guarantee their autonomy, but in return they had to kill Kyle. After examining the dogs standing in front of him, Sam asked who wanted to go to Young High School and give them their message. Hunter turned his eyes away from Sam, raised his hand and began hesitantly trying to draw Sam's attention to him. Sam looked at him angrily. Hunter said that he and 2 of his friends recently fought with Kyle, and Kyle won. Hunter asked if they had any chance of defeating him. The other dogs stood silently and nervously. Hunter kept saying that Kyle wasn't human, but a monster. Hunter also said that when he was transferred, he heard that Bao captured the entire second year in 1 day. Finally, Hunter came to his main question. He said that Kyle manages to do it much faster. Does this mean that Kyle is stronger than Bao? He also added that rumors about Kyle are already all over the school, and asking a school that is below their rank for help is a shame. After hearing everything Hunter said, Chris and Sam were furious, because with these words he understates the authority of Bao. Hunter, realizing that it would not be sweet for him now, began to turn his head nervously, looking for support from his friends. But everyone was silent. Meanwhile, Sam, silently and slowly moving towards Hunter. It seems now someone will answer for his words. Approaching Hunter, Sam glared at him and asked if he was finished. Hunter wanted to say no, but he couldn't. Sam looked at Hunter with eyes full of anger. Hunter, seeing Sam's face, was horrified with fear and could not say a word. Sam asked if Hunter had anything else to add to what he had said earlier. Hunter obediently lowered his head and replied with fear in his voice that he didn't want to add anything and would shut up right away. Sam raised his huge hand high up, preparing it for a blow, and said that then Hunter should answer for all the nonsense he said. Sam hit Hunter right in the face with all his strength. Hunter immediately bent over from the pain. The unpleasant sound of a blow resounded on the roof. Sam's blow was so crushing that Hunter's consciousness immediately left his body, and he felt himself falling into the abyss. Blood sprayed in all directions, and Hunter's unconscious body fell to the roof floor with a thud. All the dogs standing on the roof were shocked by such a blow, and did not think that Hunter would be able to get up after this. But Hunter was not as simple as everyone thought. Exhaling heavily, he raised his face and leaned on his hands to get up. But Sam didn't want to leave the case unfinished, and he stepped on Hunter's fingers with all his strength. Hunter felt a sharp and severe pain in his fingers, which intensified every second. He tried to restrain himself, but could not, and a cry of pain echoed within the roof. Still standing and pressing Hunter's fingers, Sam said that no one can take Bao's place. He has no equal. Sam went on to say that Bao is a living legend of Hong Jin High School and the Red Dragon Gang. When he finished speaking, he shouted furiously, asking if it was clear to everyone. The dogs, still standing side by side in a row, obediently, at the same time and loudly answered Sam that they understood everything. Hunter, sitting on his knees, held his still aching fingers, trying to restrain the pain. He replied in a strangled voice that he also understood. Sam, hearing Hunter's answer, looked at him intently. Sam didn't like the intonation and asked Hunter what kind of expression it was and did he still disagree with it. Sam walked over to Hunter, who was sitting on his lap, took his collar and lifted it to his face with one light movement. Hunter hung helplessly on Sam's arms and realized that he couldn't do anything. His noses trembled with approaching fear. Sam, who was not satisfied with the lesson he had taught Hunter, shouted with anger in his voice that he should answer his question right away. Hunter, hanging in the air, coughing from shortness of breath, nervously apologized. He said that he would never speak like that about Bao again. Sam, planning to hold a couple more educational receptions, asked Hunter with displeasure if he was sure of what he had said. Realizing that Sam might overdo it, Chris went to Sam's side and told him that Hunter had had enough. Sam immediately stopped his bullying and released his hands. Hunter flew down to the floor and fell painfully. Sam turned to Chris and they looked at each other. Hunter, restraining the pain in his body, slowly crawled away. The dog, with whom Hunter was friends, helped him up and supporting him by the hand, helped him get off the roof. Brett was looking at Hunter from the side. Walking friends were told that they had heard that they were close, which means that the two of them and Brett can go to the high school together. With discontent and apprehension, Hunter's friend asked if they really had to go there right now. Chris looked in their direction and ordered in a commanding tone that they should go there right now. Adjusting his glasses, Chris looked at them with displeasure and asked what was the matter. Was it really so difficult for them to deliver a message to Bao? The dog, hearing the threat in Chris's voice, immediately hurried to bend down and answer that it was a great honor for him to carry out Bao's orders. Satisfied with the answer, Chris turned around and walked to the edge of the roof. Sam saw the dogs with his eyes, and Chris, looking down from the roof, said that they would report to him about how everything went before the end of lessons. The dogs answered loudly and simultaneously that they understood. Brett, Hunter, and the dog from 10-2 set off at a slow pace to leave the school. Approaching the fence, Brett drew attention to the watchman. Fortunately, he was asleep and they would not have to invent excuses to get out. Walking down the street, the dog from 10-2 asked Hunter how his shoulder was, because he saw him fall on him. Hunter stretched his shoulder with an unpleasant feeling and replied that it hurt wildly. Hunter said Sam was a lot stronger than he thought. The dog from 10-2 paid attention to Hunter and turned his face. Hunter added that he didn't seem to have met anyone stronger than this jerk. The dog from 10-2 grinned and looked at Hunter and said that Sam was still their high school student, and that Hunter should not talk about him behind his back. Hunter crossed the corresponding sign with his hands and exclaimed that Sam had gone to hell. Hunter looked at his friend and said he would gather the guys while Bao was away. The dog looked at him with incomprehension. Hunter said that if he captured the Red Dragons, he would allow him to be his right-hand man. The dog laughed and asked if his lip would crack. The dogs came to the gate of the Jiang school. They began to decide how they would get there. There was an offer to climb over the fence before the guards noticed them. Brett said that the guys from the baseball team are the strongest dogs of the gang of the highest young. Their team took last place in the competition, and they never go to class, which means they hang around somewhere nearby. Hunter was surprised to ask how Brett knew so much about the higher jungle if he had never gone to it. Brett explained that he was thinking of going into sports, since he had given up on studying and was looking after schools with good sports teams. Hunter remembered with a grin that Brett had actually played baseball in high school. He asked Brett why he stopped. Was it really because of the girl or was he swollen? Brett looked back with displeasure. Brett turned and looked at Hunter with eyes full of anger. He told him that it was none of his business. Hunter hastened to reassure Brett by saying that he understood everything and should not look at him so menacingly. They walked through the streets and looked around. The dog from 10 minutes too said he doesn't see anyone from the higher Jiang. He suggested that they split up so that the search would go faster. They split up and Brett went alone down the street. He walked and carefully examined the streets. When he reached the vending machines with toys, he heard screams and scolding. Brett saw someone yell at a junior high student that where was he staring at. The elementary school students had a lump in their throat. They turned around in horror and began to run away. The scumbags in sports uniforms stood and were proud of the educational work done on the younger ones. One of them swore and said that today was definitely not his day, because he managed to lose absolutely all the games. Brett came out from behind the alley and stood in front of them. Two scumbags were surprised and one of them, after appraising Brett, asked his friend what kind of fat guy he was. He shouted to Brett and ordered him to come to them. The scumbag, full of self-confidence, smiled slyly and asked Brett if he had money with him. The second scumbag also made a satisfied grin, supporting the initiative to get hold of money. Brett glared back at them. It all started 10 years ago, when the world became a playground and people turned into players. They killed monsters and tried to survive. The tasks were given by the masters, the so-called GM. This game was not enjoyed by its players, but by a deity high in the sky who ruled the world. There were also deities watching the game. Some made the players they liked their avatars and personally took part in the game. And as a result, all of humanity died out. The hard-won finale is the destruction of humanity. There was only one way to be saved from death. It's getting out of this world through a hole in the sky. However, according to the rules of the game, the avatar cannot pass through it. This avatar turned out to be one young man. He was lying on the ground and looking up at the sky. His eyes were tired, and his face was haggard and exhausted. A message appeared in front of the guy about reaching the bad end of the lonely world. He noticed that the name was sonorous and it suited the last surviving person. Then a new message appears in which the game thanks the player for completing all the levels alone. When the text changes and a notice of the end of the game appears on the tablet, the young man takes the sword in his hand and punctures the message with it. The guy takes a deep breath and tells himself that these words mean that his role has been played. He turns the weapon around and points it towards his heart. The guy decides that this option is better than being alone in this deserted world. Suddenly, a sign appears on which it is written that the DLC shop opens after clearing all single modes. The young man does not understand why the message appeared right now, because usually there are such shops in console games. The guy swipes the ad and a new one appears, which says that the player will be able to purchase items for points that will help him in the DLC. He will be able to purchase a second set and start the game from the beginning. Various benefits will also be provided. The player's face shows surprise and confusion. He wonders if the deities know about this. The answer is found quickly, and he realizes that if they were aware of what was happening, they would not have left him just like that. The young man raises his head to the sky and does not understand why this function arose. He assumes that it is the Joker who appears after passing the game. A crazy smile appears on his face and he thinks he has lost his mind. Reasoning leads to the fact that there is nothing strange in this, because this is a game and if it is not a hallucination, then the guy is sure that he will be able to make this game. To purchase this set, he needs to pay 1 million points. In 10 years he managed to earn 1,700,000 points. The player buys a set and gets benefits. After that, flashes of light appear around the young man. He prays for it to be true. If he can really start over, he can change everything, including this terrible ending. The guy's body rises up. He closes his eyes and blue rays of light penetrate the player. A notification appears telling the player to try to move to the other end in the second round. The system wishes the player a pleasant game. So the first round ended. The player opens his eyes and finds himself in the old world. Birds are singing around, the sun is shining and there are no destroyed buildings. The guy presses his finger in the air, but the status window does not open. A long-haired girl with a pretty appearance approaches the young man. It was Han Jai-soo, who was a close friend of the young man at the university. She was a year younger than him, but she knew how to take good care of others, often approached a friend when he was alone and talked to him. They were quite friendly. Jai-soo was well-mannered, so she did not let the young man go until the last. Noticing the appearance of her friend, the girl assumes that he was playing computer games all night again. She says that at this rate, young men's grades may suffer this semester. The player raises his head and notices that the semester will not begin. The young man asks Jai-soo about today's date, and the girl replies that today is August 17th. At this moment, the ground beneath them cracks and an ominous green monster hand appears from there, and the young man realizes that the game has begun. The girl notices that Zihan is frozen and thinks it's because of a sleepless night. Jaisu reminds a friend that classes start next week. The guy replies that he remembers about it and, looking up at his girlfriend, thanks her for everything. He is grateful to the girl not only for taking care of him. Suddenly Jaisu suggests to Zihan to go to another place, and the young man did not understand why the girl so abruptly suggested it. He looks to the side and sees Lee Jong-hyun. He's always hanging around Jaisu and calling Zihan a bad player. Zihan tells his girlfriend that it's not worth changing seats just because of him. The girl does not understand why the young man said that, because he did not want to face Jong-hyun. The young man notices that now he does not feel these feelings, because in his memory it was 10 years ago. The girl folds her arms on her chest and says that she does not like Jong-hyun because of his strange look. She stands her ground and offers to go to another place, but the sound attracts her attention. Jaisu turns around and asks what's going on there. The young man's eyes widen with fear, and he remembers that 10 years ago it all started with these words. They were still chatting about nothing that day, and she said exactly the same thing. The girl thought they were filming a movie there. Green monsters appeared below and people around mistook them for people in suits. Passers-by begin to approach these monsters, and Jaisu invited a friend to come down and look too. But Zihan opens up and asks his girlfriend to wait a bit. 10 years ago, a young man followed Jaisu to see the monsters. Suddenly there is a cry of a man who says that a man has been stabbed. People began to run away from monsters, but it was their most unfortunate choice. Goblins mostly attack the weak and infirm, so turning your back on them was tantamount to asking to kill. Killing for them was not hunting, but entertainment, so they killed people with a smile. A goblin runs up to Jaisu and Zihan, and the young man remembers this day 10 years ago. Then he was too weak and cowardly. Jaisu covered the guy with herself, and he stood rooted to the spot. Her scarlet blood splattered his face. A window appears from the system that informs you that synchronization is starting. The young man decides that this time everything will be different, because he is a lone player who has seen this world. The goblin runs closer and tries to strike at Zihan, but he manages to dodge and hit the monster. A dagger falls out of the creature's hands. The young man grabs it and kills the monster. Then a lot of messages appear. In one of them it was written that the player destroyed the goblin. The second one said that the young man could purchase DLC goods as a reward for completing level 1. Synchronization is completed and Zihan moves to level 2. You can get points for completing the task. With these points, you can increase your experience or buy an item. This is a general rule for most games. These rules apply in this world, which has turned into a game. Therefore, at the first stage, Zihan had 700,000 points left. A lot of black balls, resembling eyeballs, descend from the sky. The voice of the system announces that people are invited to the game, and from that moment are the players who must complete the main task. In case of failure, punishment will follow. The system adds that players will be able to find out more details in the Help tab. People's eyes are fixed on the sky. Their faces are full of misunderstanding and fear. Zihan, meanwhile, thinks that if he dramatically increases his scores or uses too good a weapon, the gods will immediately notice him. You need to be careful and be grateful that it all started anew. An observer flew over Zihan. These are the eyes of the gods and the master of the game. It may be different for each user depending on the level, but in most cases it looks like a black eyeball with a purple iris inside. If the gods suspect the young man of something, this may affect the degree of complexity of the tasks. When this thought appeared in the guy's head, at that moment a goblin tried to attack him, but Zihan quickly noticed it and stopped him by taking him by the neck. The young man made a decision that from the very beginning he had to be careful in his actions. When Zihan held the monster hostage, he wondered if it looked like he was having a hard time dealing with the monster. Jaisu called her friend by name and said that she knew what was going on. She explained that such monsters cannot appear in the real world just like that. In addition, there is a strange alert and a voice in my head. This means that reality is no longer the same as Jaisu used to perceive it. Zihan replied that in the real world it is impossible to see such an alert with a message. Zihan looked at his girlfriend and said she looked calm. Hearing this, the girl was indignant and said that he was too calm. She also asked about how he managed to cope with that monster so easily. Having received no answer to his question, the voice announced the beginning of the main task. The players needed to get out of the university campus in 2 days. The voice also added that, starting from this moment, people will be attacked by numerous goblins. Players must either destroy them or run away. The main goal is to go outside the campus. Each player receives a reward depending on their personal achievements, so the voice advised them to actively participate in completing the task. After listening to all the instructions, Zihan tells the girl that they will continue the conversation later, and now they need to run before the goblins come. After these words, monsters began to appear from everywhere. The young man grabbed Jaisu by the arm and took off. Friends started to run, and behind them goblins attacked people. When they managed to escape from the monsters, the girl thought about the injured people. Zihan replied that there are not so many victims at the moment. Goblins have the strength of an average adult male. Moreover, as soon as people start to gather in a crowd, everything will calm down a little, the young man said. The friends reached the safe zone. They managed to enter it before the goblins attacked them. The guy explained to Jaisu, if this is a game, then surely there must be a place where monsters can't get into. When the girl was convinced that the monsters would not be able to enter the territory of the safe zone, she sat down on the ground to catch her breath. The young man said that they would rest for a while and then continue on their way. Zihan made the decision that Jaisu should be armed with everything necessary so that she could stand alone against at least one goblin. People kept running away from the goblins. They still didn't fully understand what really happened in the world. The girl and the guy tried to escape from the three monsters, but it was hard for them. In the next second, Jaisu appeared in front of them, holding a dagger in her hands, and various potions were attached to her belt. While Zihan and Jaisu were sitting in the safe zone, God was watching them. There's only one reason why they were watching the players. The gods did it for fun. They chose the player they liked and made him their avatar. We watched him go through the tasks and enjoyed the game. These are the gods. Suddenly, the young man lay down with his back to the observer and inside himself asked the eye to fly away as soon as possible. When the observer flew away, Zihan decided to check out the DLC goods shop. The guy opens the system window, and it is highlighted in purple. The player was afraid of this and decided to test Jaisu's reaction to this light. But the girl did not react to this in any way, and Zihan realized that only he sees this illumination. The player turns his attention to the web browser, the community of the game, which is used by the gods. Then he notices the chat and enters it under the nickname Anonymous48. One of the chat participants asked to introduce himself, and Zihan decided to remain anonymous and did not write anything in response. After reading the correspondence of the gods, the young man realized that they were talking about the players. The guy realized that this chat is a convenient thing, because with it you can learn a lot of useful information. Next time he plans to try to write something there. After checking the community, the player decides to view the shop. He presses the right button and a high wall appears in front of him with depressions inside which there were various weapons. Several of them were closed and Zihan suggested that it depends on the level passed. The guy pays attention to the blue box, which was crossed out. It was written on it that the main task was not completed. It is not clear to Zihan yet whether it is possible to open all of them or only part of them. There wasn't even any explanation, so the guy thought even more. Zihan understands that he did well in the first stage. He decides to check if there are any features there and, excluding closed tasks, finds a set of multiplayers. It was written on the box that at the first stage the young man was a lone player. At the second stage, the system wishes a pleasant game in the company of colleagues. The team is a contractual relationship without the right to betray. The maximum number of team members is 5 people. Thanks to the multiplayer set, the young man is given bonuses to increase the skill level, transfer skill, etc. This set will cost Zihan 20,000 points. He has 700,000 on his account, so the player will have enough for a set. At the same time, the young man understands that if all the items will cost so much, then he needs to save. Not far from Zihan and Jaisu, a guy screams, asking people to unite, because this way it will be easier for them to cope with monsters. Having gathered enough people, they go on the offensive. They try to fight goblins, but it's hard for humans. Jaisu approaches a friend and asks if they will be in the safe zone for a long time. The young man replies that they will be on their way soon. The girl smiles and says that during this time she managed to get hungry. Zihan is surprised at how calm her friend behaves in such an environment. Before they leave the safe zone, Zihan gives the girl a dagger which he managed to take from the goblin. Jaisu begins to worry, because if the young man gives her the knife, then he himself will have nothing left. The guy waves it off and replies that he will find more weapons. Besides, Jaisu is more defenseless than he is. The player also gives the girl a VIP brooch, which accelerates wound healing and increases points by 20%. The girl sees the brooch and asks where the friend found it and assumes that the brooch looks like a game item. Zihan replies that this item was there when he killed the goblin. He is also surprised that his girlfriend has heard about game items. Jaisu says that it would be strange to give an ordinary brooch in such a situation, and even more strange if Zihan had such a brooch with him. The young man thinks that he gave 10,000 points for this brooch, along with his 20,000. When Jaisu noticed that the brooch could become invisible, Zihan realized that the DLC shop was the best. They sell goods of a completely different level than in an ordinary shop. The brooch cost the player a lot, but if you think about the effect, it's saving. Reality became a game, but death still meant the end. Judging from the one hand, the healing of wounds for 20,000 points is worth it. Moreover, it increases points by 20%, so this is a very profitable item. It is not for nothing that they say that items are important in the game. The players leave the safe zone and Zihan tells the girl that she needs to focus on defense to get out of here. Meanwhile, 3 men are sitting in a dark office surrounded by purple. One of them complains about the chaos that took place below and notice that the people are funny creatures. On his property, they beg to be saved, and then they just died one by one. A man finds this development boring. Another guy shared that people in his area were shooting and made a fuss. Then he asked a third man named Arcados about his plot. The man thought about it and brought his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose. Then he replied that there was one guy who was promising. Arcados' gaze was fixed on the screen where Zihan was killing a goblin. Friends check equipment and prepare for an attack. They hide on the terrace of the university behind the benches in order to attack unexpectedly. Corpses are lying around, and goblins are rapidly killing people. Jaisu jumps off the terrace and runs towards the monsters. The girl and Zihan had a plan. Before the attack, the young man said that if there are so many groups of goblins, then surely there must be someone who controls them. Jaisu was surprised by such knowledge of a friend, and the guy replied that this is usually the rule in games and every gamer knows about it. Zihan cited the example of documentaries that show that all animals living in packs have a leader. This leader is the boss in this building, and if you don't kill him, it will be difficult to get out of here. Jaisu clarifies whether the friend wants to kill the boss alone, and Zihan replies that he will need the girl's help. Therefore, according to the plan, the girl uses the smell of temptation. This elixir will attract all the weak monsters in the area. After using this elixir, they use a potion that will allow Zihan to become invisible for 5 minutes. Jaisu will act as bait. When the girl managed to attract the attention of the goblins, she continues to run, luring other monsters. At this moment, the girl notices Li Zhonghayan running nearby. Jaisu recalls the words of Zihan, who said that the more people left alive, the greater the reward, so they need to kill the leader. Jaisu overtakes Zhonghayan and kills the goblins running after them. Zhonghayan and the girl who ran next to him fall to the ground from impotence. The girl notices that her body has suddenly become so light, and the guy asks in surprise how Jaisu managed to do it. The girl gets angry and, turning towards the guy, says that in such a situation, you should first thank him for saving you. Suddenly Jaisu finds it hard to breathe. She had a feeling as if the blood in her body was boiling. She realizes that there is little time left and she needs to be prevented by goblins, so she stretches out her hand with the potion and breaks it. Jaisu's body begins to be surrounded by red rays, and the goblins around gather closer to the girl. A malicious smile appears on Jaisu's face and her eyes light up red. When a sufficient number of monsters gathered in the district, the girl decided that they needed to be blocked. Zihan walks down the street and thinks about Jaisu. He worries if she's okay. A hidden boss suddenly appears in front of him and, covering his eyes from the sun with his hand, the young man greeted him. Goblin strikes, but misses. Then the player decides to answer and calls the team score distribution and transfers 20 points to dexterity. The guy jumps up, and the monster is confused, having lost the person from the field of view. Zihan jumps on the goblin and before he has time to recover, he stabs him in the eye. The creature begins to howl from unbearable pain, and the player jumps off it at a safe distance at this time. The next moment, the young man picks up a stone and, adding 10 points to the strength, knocks out the goblin's sword. Zihan picks up the weapon and when the goblin falls to the ground in pain, the player kills the creature. For killing him, the guy receives a reward in the form of a hobgoblin belt and 500 points. Zihan grins and says that this is a worthy reward for killing a hidden boss. The young man decides to view the characteristics of the belt, and the system reports that this item adds 10 points to the strength. Also, the limitations of the main task do not affect these indicators. The player opens a tab where all the information about his rank, features, and abilities was written. Opening it, the young man sees that now there is a limit of 100 points. Since he has the rank of F, that's because this is the first task. The guy closes the system window and realizes that the gods will soon find out that he killed the boss, so he needs to get out of here as soon as possible before the observer arrives. Zihan turns his head and remembers that Jai-Su should be in that direction. The young man walks down the street and finds it strange that the goblins have not yet come here. The time of the invisible potion is only 5 minutes. The guy starts to worry that the girl could not get out. Suddenly, the player hears a noise and a crowd of goblins runs past him. Zihan noticed that the creatures were afraid of something, so he rushed from the spot to save his girlfriend. Now there are various strange smells mixed around, but the young man clearly heard the smell of blood, so he accelerated his run. When he reached the bridge where Jai-Su was, Zihan froze in place. His expression changed and now it was not fear, but shock. There were dead goblins lying around, there were green spots of creatures' blood everywhere. The girl was standing with her back to her friend and, hearing his appearance, greeted Zihan. Jai-Su managed to defeat a huge number of goblins. She single-handedly killed all the monsters in the area without a drop of fear. Her eyeballs turned black and her iris turned red. The girl had a sword in her hand when Zihan ran up to her. The girl smiled affably at the young man, and he could not recover after what he saw. Goblins aren't the strongest monsters, but Zihan doesn't understand how Jai-Su managed to single-handedly destroy so many monsters. The guy decides to ask about what happened and ask if Jai-Su used an invisible potion. The friend smiled and replied that when she was luring monsters, she suddenly ran into a guy. The girl was pointing her finger at John Hyun. She said that at first he looked fine, but then suddenly he fell and Jai-Su thought he was dead. The girl thought about it and came to the conclusion that he was most likely afraid of goblins. Zihan then assumed that he fainted because of Jai-Su. The girl was genuinely surprised by this answer. Zihan asks his girlfriend to show him the status window. He will send a request for data verification, and the girl only needs to accept it. Jai-Su loudly asks for a status window to appear and it opens. The young man sees that the experience points are high, but he did not find anything unusual. After a second, he notices the red skull icon. This Death Star is a rare SS rank skill, passive. At the first stage, Zihan saw him once. A world called Jin and a being called Helma who came from this world. Zihan met him while completing a mission and remembered him because he was the strongest warrior from another dimension. It was he who possessed the Death Star skill. Having this skill could cause terror in the enemy. Now Zihan understands why the goblins then ran away from Jai-Su so quickly. However, if the holders of this skill could not cope with this power, they would lose their mind and could even lose their identity. Fortunately, the young man has not noticed these signs in Jai-Su yet. The girl also noticed the appearance of this skill in herself and decided to ask a friend about it. Zihan wondered if he should tell her the truth, but then he realized that hiding it would be wrong. The young man decided to explain to her in a nutshell that this is a feature thanks to which you become stronger at the sight of blood. The girl raised the sword up and looked at it thoughtfully, saying that it was a disgusting skill. When the girl's eyes lit up red, Zihan removed the sword from her face, saying that if she used it often, it could be dangerous for the girl. Then he said that such a skill from the very beginning is a good indicator. Zihan thought that, judging by the fact that Jai-Su didn't have a single scratch, this skill along with the brooch helped a lot. He was struck by the power of recovery. The young man came closer to Jai-Su, who was still sitting on the ground, and offered her a contract. The girl looked at her friend in amazement, not understanding what contract the young man was talking about. The guy replied that there was nothing strange about it, he just offered to become her one team. Jai-Su agrees and Zihan buys the set. The question arises in his head, if everything works out, will he be able to become stronger than in his previous life? After purchasing a set, the girl receives a notification to join the team, and she confirms this action, fully trusting her friend. Zihan gets a notification that asks if the player wants to share skills with the first team member. The young man confirms this action and the system informs that the player currently has no skills, so he cannot share them. The young man realized that in order to share skills, he must also have them. Thus, team members need to share skills. Therefore, Zihan decides that it is necessary to share with Jai-Su such skills that will be most useful to her, so it will be better for both. The player notices that there are observers in the sky and he is glad that they did not arrive when Jai-Su dealt with all the goblins. Zihan gets up from the ground and offers her friend to finish the task. The girl agrees. At this moment, John Hyun and his partner come to their senses. Jong Hyun notices Jai-Su and starts shouting her name in fright. The girl hears this and decides for herself that such a reaction is better than a nasty look. Zihan approaches the guy and asks him what he was doing here. When John Hyun starts shouting that Zihan shouldn't care, Jai-Su approaches him and puts a knife to his throat. The girl looks at the guy threateningly and tells him to answer the question properly. John Hyan agrees and asks to remove the knife from him. Jai-soo turns to Zihan with a smile on his face and asks him to repeat the question. Si-hyun asks how John Hyan ended up here alone, because people were gathering groups around. The guy replied that he was on reconnaissance. Si-hyun asked about the girl, and the young man replied that he was with her alone. If something happens to one of them, then the second one should report it. Si-hyun grins and realizes that someone gave the guy this instruction, because he would not voluntarily agree to this case. John Hyan gets angry and is about to call the interlocutor, but Jai-soo threatens him with a knife again. The young man calms down and, laughing, replies that he would not have gone on such a task on his own. John Hyan was unlucky and drew lots. Si-hyun realized that there is a person who commands people to fight goblins. If he can control a panicked crowd, it means that this person has a head on his shoulders and he has the makings of a leader. Si-hyun turns to the guy and asks him to take him to the head. John Hyan doesn't understand why he needs it. Si-hyun replies that the guy's job is to show the way, no more is required of him. The young man begins to lose his temper. He gets angry at Si-hyun and raises the tone of his voice. At this moment, a goblin appears behind him and is about to attack John Hyan. Si-hyun reaches out and grabs the monster by the paw, presses it to the ground and kills it. John Hyan runs away from Si-hyun. The self-confidence on his face is replaced by fear and horror. Si-hyun stretches his arm and says that goblins have one interesting feature. In a fight, they always try to kill the one who looks the weakest first. The young man holds out his hand to John Hyan and asks if he wants to stay alone or still decides to show the way. The guy agrees and decides to take Zihan to the head. In his previous life, Zihan was trying to escape from here at this very time. He is glad that he managed to find a safe zone. The company is moving up the stairs, which was strewn with corpses. Si-hyun decides to ask John Hyan where they are going and if he is showing the way correctly. John Hyan replied that they were going in the right direction. The young man added that their shelter was in the gym. They approach the building and John Hyan points to the window, saying that their hiding place is there. In the gym, meanwhile, people were trying to give first aid to others. Because of the goblins, a large number of people suffered, so the rest tried to save them. After assessing the situation in the shelter, Si-hyun realizes that their leader was probably at a loss himself, but he had the strength to help people and take shelter in this building. A person who is calm enough and can easily gain trust, and also has some awareness. There are few such people on this campus. After analyzing the situation, Si-hyun realized that the headman was the one who sent the young man to investigate. John Hyan asked with interest how he understood this. Si-hyun shifted his gaze to the young man who was standing on the dais and said that it was impossible to recognize him. On the stage was the headman Yoon Hyan Kyon. This time, he once again showed that he has all the qualities of a leader, so the gods could not help but be interested in him. Si-hyun assumed that he had received the status of a rare avatar, although in his previous life he was attacked by a hobgoblin, and he died. The young man looked back at Hyan Kyung, who was surrounded by observers. Apparently, he does not know that if he does not get out of the university, he can die. This meant that he still hadn't become an avatar. There were a large number of observers in the gym, so surely there should have been a request for an avatar. Si-hyun thought that Hyan Kyung was doubting whether it was possible to trust the gods and whether it was profitable for him to become an avatar. After reviewing all the notifications with an invitation to avatars, the headman noticed John Hyan. After coming down from the stage, he approached him to ask if he was okay, but noticed Han Jai-soo. The headman sees that the girl is fine and asks her what happened. Si-hyun enters the conversation and says that the formalities should be postponed. First, they all need to get out of this place. Hyan Kyung was taken aback and asked the young man to introduce himself. Si-hyun said his name, and the manager, in turn, asked why he thought they needed to leave the gym. Si-hyun replied that the leader was already dead. The young man did not understand which leader the guy was talking about. The player replied that the headman probably received a notification about the death of the hobgoblin leader. Without a leader, the monsters now don't know where to go. Hyan Kyung confirmed that he had seen the notification. Si-hyun continued that for this reason it is necessary to seize the moment and get out of campus. From the very beginning, the task was not survival or shelter, but escape. Si-hyun said that if you open the task window, the time that was given to complete the task will appear there. The headman opened the window with the words that he did not know that there was such a thing here. The young man continued his speech and suggested that Hyan Kyung knows that this situation is not like reality. It's like someone has locked people in a game and is having fun watching them. Hearing these words, the headman was surprised and assumed that Si-hyun knew something about it. The young man hastened to reassure the head, saying that these were just his assumptions and observations. But he was absolutely sure that whoever he was not their friend. After this conversation, Sai-Han made sure that Yoon Hyun Kyung is not an avatar, and his knowledge of the game and the system is at the beginner level. The young man decides that the headman needs to be persuaded as soon as possible and run away from the gym. The hobgoblin has died, and there are fewer victims. The gods are gradually getting bored watching the players. It is unknown what other task they will come up with. The more favorable the situation is for the players, the less interest it causes the gods. In this crazy game, the most important thing is the reaction of the gods. Sai-Han realizes that they have probably already found out about the hobgoblin's destruction. Therefore, soon they will come up with something new. After listening to Sai-Han, the headman realized that the most important thing in completing the task was to escape from the university campus. The manager was thinking that some measures should be taken. In addition, they have no connection with the outside world. They can use the internet and find out what is happening outside, but they cannot send a signal and transmit information about themselves. The headman suggested that this was due to the assignment. Sai-Han's eyes widen in shock. He is surprised that Hyun Kyung understands the situation so quickly, and at the first stage he could not do anything and died. The young man realized that something was wrong here. As far as he remembers, then there was no way to fight back against the goblins and go outside the gym. Sai-Han heard that while the headman was defending himself from the monsters, he was killed. Therefore, it seemed to him that the leader was too cowardly and not a decisive person. But he didn't look like that at all. Sai-Han's thoughts are interrupted by a voice behind him. A young man approaches them and says that the best thing they can do now is to wait for help. The kid added that they can't put themselves in danger out there. He also asked Hyun Kyung if he really agreed with what Si-Han was saying. Si-Han turns around and recognizes the guy as Bat Park Dong-won. He knew this guy perfectly well. In his previous life, he framed him several times. The leader replied that he agreed with Si-Han's words, but only if they had a connection with the police or rescuers. At the same time, the headman wonders what will happen if they sit in a shelter, but no one will come to them. Dong-won is interested in the fact that, therefore, the headman suggests taking a risk, putting people's lives at risk. The young man turns to Si-Han and introduces himself by name, saying that he is the deputy headman. Dong-won added that the guy had just said ridiculous things. He also asked why Si-Han was offering to get out of here. The young man does not understand why his proposal is ridiculous. The deputy replied that Si-Han was out of his mind and half of those present were injured. Dong-won doesn't understand how Si-Han is going to run away with them. He added that the young man was very lucky. He was able to kill a couple of monsters, and now he believes that he is not afraid of anything. There are terrible monsters outside, and according to the deputy, it is impossible to leave the shelter with the wounded without carrying any weapons. To expect the help of the military or the police, this is the best thing they can do now for the sake of all people. Si-Han understands that an ordinary person can think like that, but Dong-won is not like that. He infiltrated different groups of people and split them. Si-Han believes that he is a psycho who gloatingly watched the killing of people, and he himself escaped alone in the end. He doesn't care that people die when it comes to personal gain. Jai-soo enters into a dialogue. She does not understand how Dong-won can talk about being lucky enough to kill monsters. The girl asks if he saw them killing those goblins. The young man replies that after killing those monsters that are outside, an inscription appears above their head. He asks if they killed those monsters. The girl offers to go outside and show Dong-won how she killed goblins. She added that it was stupid to sit and wait for rescuers while being afraid of monsters. The police and the military cannot be contacted. They do not know when they will be found. Dong-won asks if other people will be able to accept all this and understand. Si-Han enters into the conversation and talks about the young man staying here alone. Dong-won was outraged by this statement. Si-Han, in turn, replied that he did not hope that they would be able to persuade all the people who are in the shelter. If someone wants to stay, it has nothing to do with Si-Han. The thought appeared in Si-Han's mind that despite his words, Dong-won would never stay here. If this is really the Park Dong-won he knows, most likely, his goal is to kill all these people and reward them for their lives. Park Dong-won has a completely opposite method, unlike Si-Han, because he is trying to save as many people as possible in order to get a reward. If Dong-won stays in the gym with those who are afraid of escaping and receives a reward for killing several people, then the risk of falling under suspicion will be less than if he survives and can choose from here. Si-Han decides to ask the deputy again about whether he will stay here alone. The headman interrupts him and replies that he will go with Si-Han. Dong-won smiles and says that he can't do anything in this situation, so he will follow Hyun Kyung. After this statement, Zihan is now sure that the deputy pretends to know nothing. However, he is definitely aware of the reward system of this game. Dongwon quickly understood the situation, because he had already become an avatar of the gods. The people who were in the gym still decided to escape. The man standing at the window was trying to find the strength. He looks out the window and asks Hyan Kyung if he's going to be okay, because there are still a lot of monsters outside. The headman replied that according to the guys who conducted the reconnaissance, the leader of the goblins is dead, so the others are not able to think properly what to do. Suddenly there is a shout from the teacher, who says that if Yoon Hyan Kyan does amateur work and continues trying to get people out, then next semester he may not expect good grades. When all the preparations for escape were ready, a crowd of people gathered at the door. At the head was the headman, who asked the others to prepare for the exit. Jae-soo decides to ask Si-han if they can go out. The young man replied that if nothing special happens, they will be able to quickly get out of the shelter. The girl asks what the guy meant. He replied that usually goblins who have lost their leader do not attack people, so there is nothing to worry about. Jae-soo asks what the friend was talking about then. Si-han mentally replied that he was talking about Dongwon. Si-han doesn't like him, but killing him now would be a bad idea. There are too many people around, and besides, it can be used later. When a group of people leaves the building and the headman directs their thoughts and conduct in the right direction, Si-han notices that he is doing well. Hyan Kyung does everything he's told, so he can be trusted with these people. People move closer and approach the gate. Suddenly, Si-han receives a notification from the system, which says about a new task. The difficulty level has increased and the sentinel will appear soon. Unexpectedly, an earthquake begins for everyone. One of the guys from the group looks up and sees the Minotaur. Seeing him, Zihan doesn't understand why the gods sent the monster on the first mission. They sent a monster here, which usually appears after at least 15 completed tasks. Zihan realizes that hobgoblins or similar hidden bosses could be defeated. If ordinary players join forces, they may well complete the task, but not the guard. In single-player wrestling, 100% loss events are often arranged. If the gods had sent the Minotaur here, it meant that they just wanted to kill everyone who was here. The young man is angry at Akartos for deciding to go the easy way. Zihan realizes that the guard will have experience point limits since this is the first task. Despite the fact that the Minotaur is a rank C monster, his stats cannot exceed level F. Dongwon starts shouting from the crowd for people to run. Jae-soo turns up next to him and closes his mouth, saying that he should behave more quietly. The Minotaur has the habits of a bull, so you can't run. If people run, the monster will immediately rush after them. This is what Dongwon wants. One man decides to run away. Then the Minotaur emits a deafening roar, which causes the effect of wild horror and stupor. Si-han understands that it will be better this way, safer than running away. Another man runs out of the crowd again and the monster crushes him. Then the teacher decides to escape, but the monster notices the fugitive and kills him. Jae-soo closes his eyes so as not to see the moment of the murder. People are scared, and the Minotaur roars again. The headman assesses the situation and notices that the Minotaur is slightly more than 5 meters. He doesn't need a weapon to tear a man to pieces. Hyan Kyung doesn't understand why the difficulty level has suddenly increased. The leader also tries to remember how to escape from this monster and whether it would be safer to escape from it. Zihan decides that he needs someone who can distract the monster and volunteers. The headman gets scared when he hears these words and says that he does not have to become a bait. The young man shrugs off his words and asks if there is someone else, or the headman offers to die at the hands of the Minotaur. Hyan Kyung concludes that even in such a critical situation, there is no rush in Si-han's expression. It seems to the leader that the young man is thinking out the most effective way out of this situation. Jae-soo, who is still covering Dongwon's mouth with her hand, sees her friend going somewhere and calls him. The young man waves his hand at her, gesturing for her to be silent. Then the girl realizes that he has some kind of plan. When Jae-soo releases Dongwon, he takes a deep breath and feels sorry for not being able to get the reward. The young man does not get upset for a long time about this, because he remembers that he was chosen by the deity himself, so he has nowhere to hurry. The guy decides to move away, because the Minotaur is very dangerous. The headman understands that he does not know how much time they will be able to win, but there is no other choice at the moment. The leader bows to Zihan and sincerely thanks him for his help, and then offers his deepest apologies. Zihan, meanwhile, picks up a red rag and tells all people to run away when he gives a sign. The young man jumps up and, pushing off with his feet from the vending machine with food, lands on the balcony of the building to attract the Minotaur's attention. When the young man manages to do this, he gives the command and all the people start running. The headman tells them to run as fast as possible without stopping. When Hyan Kyan shouts at a group of people to move even faster, he gets a skill called Team Shout. The leader decides to turn around and check what condition Zai-Han is in now. Turning around, he sees that the young man manages to deftly dodge the blows of the Minotaur. When his attention is attracted by the boy who called him, the headman decides that now is not the right time to look at it and also breaks off. The headman manages to get people out of the university campus, and after that he gets notifications from the system, which inform him that he has completed the task and is waiting for a reward. Hyan Kyung asks the team members to check their condition and make sure that everyone is safe. When the leader is convinced that he and his people are safe, he decides to help Zai-Han get out of there too. The young man turns around, but notices a blue shell in front of him, through which he cannot pass. The headman assumes that this is a lock that prevents you from getting to the next level. Hyan Kyung shouts to Zai-Han that all the people have successfully run through the gate, and asks the young man to escape from the monster faster. Zai-Han is distracted by his voice, and at that moment the Minotaur hits him, thereby throwing the guy up. Then the young man lands on the ground with such force that a deep hole appears in the asphalt. A pile of stones appears around and Zai-Han is under him. All the people outside the gate are silent with horror. They are waiting for some action or further development of events. Traces appear on the leader's face, and he apologizes to Jin-Soo for the fact that Zai-Han had to sacrifice his life. In his previous life, Zai-Han was not distinguished by a fair character. The young man admits to himself that he was a little mean-spirited person, and now he is no different. Perhaps that's why when he heard the words of gratitude from Yoon Hyan Kyon, he felt a little disgusted. However, this is not so bad. Zai-Han used to be weak. There were a huge number of players who were many times stronger than the young man. But he wanted to live, and for this he had to become heartless and mean. Zai-Han realized that when you're the only survivor, you end up with nothing. He realized this when he came back. Now he can choose another path. The player gets out from under the rubble of stones and earth, and noticing that there are no observers nearby, he decides to strike back at the Minotaur to prove to himself that he is capable of more. Kim Si-han's status window appears and the strength indicator has stopped at 27. The young man stands in front of the bowl and says that there are no observers here, so he can attack as much as he wants. Zai-Han used the points, and thanks to this, his physical strength level rose to 94. Zai-Han doesn't understand how at this level of difficulty he hasn't died yet. But now he was sure that all the Minotaur's indicators stopped at 100. An ordinary player will never be able to defeat a monster guard. In his previous life, Zai-Han tried to avoid meeting him, and if he did, he used all means. He didn't care about the victims of other people. The young man just wanted to survive. But this time he doesn't want to do the same. The Minotaur attacks the guy and presses him against the wall. The player grabs his horns, thereby resisting. A message appears that the guy used the points and now his strength has increased to 83. The system also reported that the indicators of strength have reached the limit. The player can no longer use points for this indicator. At one point, the young man realizes that this is the balance. Zai-Han says that the monster will now feel the existence of a wall that someone like him will never be able to overcome. At this second, the strength indicator reaches the 100 mark. When this happens, Zai-Han tears off one of the Minotaur's horns. The monster howls in pain. The young man remembers that he could never have done such a thing from his previous life. He was a lone player, heartless and seeking his own gain. An eccentric and mediocre, stupid criminal standing on the line. For someone like Zai-Han used to be, it's impossible. However, now he has no shortage of anything. He is a second-round player and the young man will try to become a hero. After defeating the Minotaur, the young man receives messages that he has completed the main task 1. The category of passing the task white gold, and the player will soon receive a reward. Zai-Han knows that white gold is the biggest reward, but he was still sorry. The player goes to the gate thinking about what the reward will be. A weapon would also be a good option, since the guy doesn't have a normal weapon right now. He hopes only that it will not be a small subject or points. After passing through the blue shell, Zai-Han notices Jisoo, who was sitting on the asphalt and was clearly waiting for her friend. The young man thought that the girl had left with the others, and then he realized that his girlfriend was worried about him. Jisoo replies that she didn't have to worry about Zai-Han, because she knew that everything would be fine. The last time they organized a team, the girl was able to see the condition of each participant. Therefore, Jisoo saw that the guy was fine even after he was hit by the Minotaur. Jisoo decides to ask if Zai-Han managed to catch the Minotaur and what kind of discharge he received. Zai-Han replied that he had received the white gold. The girl is happy for him and says that she did not expect anything else. The young man asks what category the girlfriend got and she replies that she got gold. Zihan says that gold is also good. Gold is also a high level of completion of the task, it's just that the platinum barrier is too high. A sign appears in front of the young man, on which it is written that the calculation of remuneration is completed. The player gets the achievement Sacrifice, Destruction of the Monster Guard, Destruction of the Hidden Boss. Zihan didn't understand why he was a victim if he was leading and not harming. As a reward, the young man received shape-changing orichalcum. He also received the skill Decisive Battle Time, which can increase the skill regeneration in 1000 points. After reviewing all the rewards, Zihan realized that he had received quite good rewards. He especially focused his attention on orichalcum. In addition, he was given 2 skills that can increase with high difficulty of mastering. Zihan assumed that this was the first time in the world that someone had completed the main task and killed a guard. In addition to all this, the ascending type has a high potential in the second part of the game. However, the young man is sorry that this skill is not of S rank, for example, Chancel-sewn masks. The girl asks if Zihan has checked the reward. Jai-Su also asked if he had received a message about the second task. At this moment, the young man receives a notification on which all the information about their next task was written. In the second main task, players need to go to the Roman world and kill the monster boss. Players have 14 days to complete this task. After reading all the information, Zihan noticed that he had the same task in his previous life. Those players who have passed the same level together get the same tasks, so Jai-Su and Dong-Won most likely have the same messages, thought Zihan. The young man asked why Jai-Su didn't go with the rest of the players to the Roman Tower, because she could have waited for him there. The girl replied that she did not like a large number of people, but the main reason she didn't go with that group was Dong-Won. Zihan asked his girlfriend why the deputy annoyed her, and the girl replied that he smelled unpleasant. The young man is surprised that the girl understood so quickly what kind of person Dong-Won was. If she hadn't died so early in her previous life, she would have clearly become a famous player. Jai-Su asks a friend if they will go straight to the Roman Tower. Zihan replied that they would go there slowly, because they had 2 weeks left. The young man suddenly raised his head and noticed that not a single observer had appeared nearby until now. The guy was curious, so he asked the girl if she had managed to become an avatar of the gods. Jai-Su replied that she was not an avatar. It became unclear to Zihan, because if someone applied, then the girl had already heard about the advantages of avatars. Jai-Su replied that she didn't want to get involved with someone she didn't know. In addition, the very word avatar spoils the girl's mood. After receiving such an answer, Zihan noticed that his girlfriend had changed. She thinks too coolly. The young man is not sure that this happened due to the influence of the mask of Chancel-sewn. After all, to begin with, there are no signs of madness in the girl. Even that monster Helma couldn't completely get rid of the signs of insanity after that mask. The girl replied that it seemed pointless to her, so she still has not become an avatar. Zihan decides to ask how many requests for an avatar a friend has received. Jai-Su replied that she had received about 12 applications. The young man was amazed, but he understood that the girl was worth it. But now she is a member of his team, so Zihan decided that he would help her become as good as any avatar. To begin with, the first skill that needs to be trained is a way of survival for someone who has fallen under the influence of the Chancel-sewn mask. It was a Helchen-Suragan reception. Zihan couldn't master this skill in his previous life, as he didn't have a Death Star. After the battle with Helma, the young man was able to learn martial arts, but without the Death Star skill, it was impossible to master Helchen-Suragan. Most of these skills can increase, so they are difficult to obtain and master. Because of this, in his previous life, Zihan was not particularly eager to get them. Jai-Su is sitting on the table in the lotus position. The face of the skull appears above her in a red flame. The young man watched this process in surprise. A few hours before, the friends were moving forward. Chaos reigned on the street, debris of buildings lay everywhere, there were cracks on the houses. Zihan and Jai-Su were attacked by goblins and a notification appeared in front of the young man, which said that it was time for a decisive battle. All actions are accelerated within a certain time. Zihan was successfully coping with the extermination of goblins in the area. It's time for a decisive battle, vitality, attack power, this skill increases everything. In addition, this skill can grow, so the indicators will also gradually increase. When the young man was distracted by his thoughts, Jai-Su shouted to him that a goblin was attacking him from behind. The player turns around and sees a monster flying at him from above. Zihan reacts quickly and strikes at the head, thereby throwing the monster up. The moment Zihan attacked the monster, he injured his hand. After that, his hand begins to regenerate, and the young man realized that this skill, unlike the time of the decisive battle, is passive. If you combine the Death Star and the VIP brooch, then the regeneration skill restores wounds faster by 50%. Jaisu approaches a friend and asks if he's okay. Zihan replied that everything is fine with him and also asks if the girl sees the points. She replied that she could see, and thanks to the action of the brooch, she managed to accumulate a lot. When Zihan got the answer to his question, the young man decided that he needed to share his skills with the girl. The guy started looking for a suitable place for this and came across a restaurant with his eyes. The friends entered it and, sitting down at the table, Zihan asked Jaisu to turn on the status window. Skill sharing begins with a team member. The young man was lost in thought. He realized that the time of the decisive battle was not a bad skill, but for Jaisu, the regeneration skill would be the most effective right now. The player receives a message that if the connection with a team member is not particularly strong, then the ability of the transferred skill drops to 30%. Under the condition of a strong connection, the effectiveness of the skill can reach 80%. However, when transferring a skill, the punishments it contains are not transferred. The young man is angry that he was not warned in advance that only 30% of the skill can be used. Zihan suggests that with a decrease in efficiency, the punishment also disappears. Insanity. The stronger the bond between team members, the higher the effectiveness of the skill. Jaisu says that it's nice to have new abilities, but she's a little anxious because of the lack of attack skill. Zihan replies that regeneration can also be called an attack skill. After all, the survival ability is also a great way to attack. After all, others need to evade attacks, and Jaisu may not do this, because she will be able to regain her strength immediately. Thus, the girl can use this time and strength to fight. In addition, regeneration not only heals wounds, but also increases endurance. Therefore, Jaisu will be difficult to overcome. It is not for nothing that it is considered a high-rank skill. Right now, this skill just speeds up the recovery process, but as the level increases, it will become more and more effective. After listening to her friend's explanation, Jaisu was convinced that this skill was really not bad. Zihan remembers about the task and says that they have a lot of time to complete it. Therefore, Zihan would like to master a new skill before starting to perform. Jaisu asks if what they already have isn't enough. Zihan replies that this is not enough to fight the avatars of the gods. The young man remembered that he had another skill that he could share with Jaisu. The girl doesn't understand what the guy is talking about. The player replied that this skill could not be shared, but simply given to her. The girl does not understand when her friend became like this. Before, he didn't care about others, he didn't care about anyone, but now it's like he's ready to give his girlfriend everything he has. Zihan hesitated and replied that this skill would suit Jaisu and its name would suit her. The guy added that if she doesn't want to, then he won't give it away. After a while, the girl sits down in the lotus position and closing her eyes calls Helchin Seregan. A red flame appears above her head with the silhouette of a red skull. The young man sees that she is doing well and calls the team community access. Zihan is transferred to a room with white walls, ceiling and floor. Purple squares were visible around and the young man noticed that there was more activity here than last time. The player re-enters the chat under the nickname Anonymous48 and sees messages that the user under the name Honest Life wants to kill all the players. After seeing the messages from this user, Zihan immediately realized that it was the god Park Dong-gwon. The young man noticed that, judging by the number of complaints, Park Dong-gwon was a little subdued because of Yoon Hyun Kyon. After reading a few more messages, the player realized that the correspondence in this chat is empty chatter. One of the gods wrote that his avatar is capable, but stupid. Thanks to the skills of God, he robs banks. Zihan decided to enter into a dialogue and asked why he was robbing them, because money doesn't make much sense for players right now. God replied that he didn't know why the avatar was doing this, but it was fun for him to watch the player. Then Zihan decides to ask if he can watch it too. God is not against this and invites the young man to his observer. Zihan is surprised that there are even such functions here. A mask with the number 48 appears on his face and the system informs that the appearance of anonymous users will be hidden. The guy approaches the girl god, who was standing at the big screen and watching the avatar. Anonymous comes closer, and God points his finger at his player. The young man sees a girl sitting under the rubble, who was shaking with fear. The girl notices the shoes of the approaching man and covers her mouth with her hand. The policeman bends down to the girl and asks if she is all right, because it is dangerous to be here. The girl starts screaming, and Zihan notices something that will help destroy the monster from the Roman tower, namely the key card. Friends are walking down the street and Jaisu notices that the Roman tower is in the other direction. Zai-Han replied that he wanted to go to a place before they went to the tower. To complete the second task, you definitely need something. Zai-Han looks up and sees that there were few observers on their way. This is because there are few players who have lived up to this level. Jai-Su looked around and said that the street looks terrible. She assumed it was the work of monsters. Zai-Han replied that some of it, and the rest is the work of people. The young man added that goblins do not need to touch such objects of civilization. Jai-Su came to the conclusion that the laws here no longer make sense, and there are no policemen or rescuers nearby. Everything that has happened around is a manifestation of human weaknesses. Jai-Su noticed that not everything was destroyed yet, and pointed to the TV, which was showing the news live. Zai-Han replied that the gods or the guys running this system would never leave those in power alone. The girl was distracted by the phone and noticed a goblin flying at her from behind. Zai-Han loudly informed her about it, and Jai-Su just stretched out her hand with a weapon and killed the monster in one movement. She checked the blade of the dagger and noticed that it was blunted, so she needed to purchase a new weapon. However, Zai-Han noticed that even with such a weapon, she managed to kill the monster with one blow. Jai-Su replied that she was able to do this because humanoid creatures have additional damage. Zai-Han realized that she was saying the right things. If he has 30% additional damage, then Jai-Su has 100%. The girl is strong, even though she has passed only one stage. The young man says that they need to find someone, and then they will immediately go in search of weapons. Approaching the bank, the guy says that they are in place. The girl does not understand why they came here. Does her friend really need to withdraw money? Zai-Han replied that there was no use in money now. To be more precise, you can't buy anything with them. Then Jai-Su doesn't understand why they needed to go to the bank. The young man explained that there is a person inside who is needed in the second stage. Friends walk into the building and see a policeman trying to stop masked people. There was a woman in the office who was very scared. The policeman ordered her to run away from here, and she began to worry about what would happen to the man. He tells her that he will detain the bandits and he will be fine. The policeman runs up to the masked man and knocks the knife out of his hand. The criminal did not expect that there would be someone in the bank. The policeman strikes the jaw and deals with the rest of the bandits. Jai-Su looks out from behind the door and says this man looks cool. The girl asked if Zai-Han was looking for him. The young man responds positively, and the girl says that the robbers are also players, but he defeated them all. Jai-Su wonders if that man has some kind of object that helped him deal with criminals. Zai-Han does not deny this theory, but he thinks there is another reason. In fact, the young man knew that the man was an avatar of God. The policeman notices the presence of strangers and says that it is dangerous to be here now. He advises them to go to a safer place, because now a lot of robbers come to the bank. The player replies that he did not come for a banking issue. The young man wonders if the bank can work normally in such a situation. Then the policeman assumed that the players had come here to hide. Zai-Han again denies the man's theory and says that they came for him. For Lee Mina, the man is shocked after hearing what he heard, but tries to keep himself in hand and says that he does not know such a person, and his name is Nam Kyung Kal. Jai-Su intercepts his hand and points to the man's rapid pulse, as if he was caught off guard. The girl also noticed Minnie's dilated pupils. She had a feeling that the man was very surprised when he heard this name. Jai-Su found it strange that the man was surprised because of the name he hears for the first time. The policeman loses his temper when he realized that he was discovered. He asked the players who they were, and Zai-Han replied that they were the ones who knew his true face. Suddenly, the observer of the girl to whom Zai-Han went to the observer appears in the bank. The young man noticed that this observer initially looked unusual. This observer had a white eyeball and a pink iris. Seeing the observer, Minotaur covered his face with a cap to remain unnoticed. The policeman asks how Zai-Han found out who he really is. The young man grinned and replied that the man was not even trying to hide his true face now. When the player asks the policeman to show his skill, the girl starts to get angry. She tried all the techniques to not die, clothes and even objects. It was the perfect plan. In the next second, the man's body separates and in place of a muscular policeman is a frail girl of short stature. She looks up at the young man and asks why they were looking for her. Zai-Han says that robbing a bank is low. Minotaur objects and replies that she doesn't. Jai-Su doesn't understand what's going on. She assumes it's a reincarnation skill. The young man confirms her words and says that the girl can transform into other people or creatures. Jai-Su decides to ask Zai-Han what he meant when he said that Minotaur was engaged in Hornbeam. It seemed to the ear that she was helping other people. On the contrary. The girl confirmed her words, saying that people would not believe the schoolgirl, so she was forced to transform into a policeman. The young man grins and replies that Minotaur herself brought robbers to the bank, so she cannot try to deceive them. people running away from monsters hid in a bank, so it was impossible to steal it. That's why the schoolgirl lured the robbers here. The girl's voice breaks into a scream, and she asks why she needed it. Zihan replies that she was going to take all the money for herself. If the bandits appear here a couple of times, then the rest of the people will consider that it is dangerous to be in the bank and will not come here. Zihan realized that only two people, Min-ah and Park Dong-gwon, can engage in inciting people here. The young man had seen such techniques in his past life, so he easily recognized the lie now. The schoolgirl asks if Zihan will hand her over to the police. The young man replied that he would not do this, since neither the police nor prisons are working now anyway. Moreover, someone like Minna will immediately escape from there. Then the girl asks what he will do with her. Zihan replied that she would have to spend some time with them. Minna asks how long it will last, and the young man replied that she will be with them until they pass the second task. Hearing about this, the girl starts laughing, because the player is only at the second level, and already makes himself cool. Min herself is already on the third task. Minna asks which game Zihan started with and which monster he killed first. The young man replied that she did not need to know and asked her to decide as soon as possible whether she would go with them or not. The girl turns away and says that it makes no sense for her to go with them. The guy decides to bribe the schoolgirl and says that if she goes with them, he will share points with her. Minna grins and asks how many points the losers who haven't completed the second task can have. Zihan wonders if this is how the schoolgirl behaved from the very beginning. Although it doesn't seem so scary if you remember the young man's past life. He decides that if she treats them like this, nothing good will come of it, so he needs to raise his authority in her eyes. The guy comes up to the girl and snaps his fingers on her forehead. Due to a strong blow, the girl flies a short distance away, and she does not understand what she has just been hit with. Zihan suggests that she behave politely. The young man understands that she must have been hurt, because the indicators exceeded the F rank. Minna loses her temper and runs to Zihan, saying that he has no right to tell the girl and tell her how to behave. She is not one of those who will stand still and receive. Suddenly Jai-soo appears in front of Zihan and stops the schoolgirl. The girl grabs Minna by the hand, and the schoolgirl is surprised at how strong this girl is. Minna wants to break out of Jai-soo's tight grip, but she fails to do so. Then the girl tries to transform into someone else, but Jai-soo squeezes her hand harder. Because of the pain, the schoolgirl could not concentrate and reincarnate. Jai-soo smiles and says that it would be nice if they treated each other more politely, as Zihan said. They are people, not animals. Minna through the pain says that she will be more polite and asks the girl to let go of her hand. Zihan asks Minna again if she will go with them. The team walks down the street and Minna asks Zihan and Jai-soo if they are avatars. The young man answers in the negative and asks the schoolgirl to address him as you, because formal treatment makes him uncomfortable. Minna asks why friends are so strong then. The guy replies that it is not necessary to be an avatar to become stronger than an ordinary player. Although, if you become an avatar, it is much easier to get the power. The most important thing is to have a weapon. Good indicators are not everything. We need high-quality equipment. Jai-soo decides to ask a friend if they can find a good weapon. Chaos reigns all around, not a single whole store, and there are no people. Zihan replies that they can. After these words, they all enter the safe zone. Minna asks the young man how he realized that there is a safe zone here. Zihan replied that one has only to look at the store and you can immediately guess. The girl notices that traces of robbers are visible, but there are no traces of monsters. Things are not broken, and there are no dead people. Moreover, monsters would not steal food. Minna asks what kind of weapons they are going to buy. Zihan replies that there is one way and opens a point store. The girl admires this, and the young man does not understand why the schoolgirl did not know about this. She replies that she didn't know about it at all, and she can't ask about what she doesn't know. The young man thinks that the deity could have told himself. Weapons are a necessity in the game, but the player is not surprised by this. The clown god Min-ah is known for his sadistic tendencies. He couldn't send his avatar to go the easy way. The guy says that he himself accidentally found out about the point store. He also says that Minna should not worry, because she is still at the initial stage. After finishing the verbal sparring, Zihan says that they will no longer have a chance to purchase weapons before they start the second task. Therefore, Zihan advises girls to choose something from these items. Then he points to the window where there were various weapons: shield, crossbow, sword, and bow. The guy puts his hand in his pocket. Interest appears on his face. The young man wonders what will appear in the store this time. As Zihan had guessed, the store mainly features standard weapons. The whole trick of the game lies in unusual items. There weren't even any potions presented. If you buy a potion from the very beginning, then the chance of survival increases significantly. The young man remembered that if you go a little further, there will be a player who makes weapons himself. But at the moment they have no other way to get weapons. The guy understands that you need to be grateful at least for such equipment. First of all, Zihan decides to buy himself the most normal weapon from what was presented in the store. The young man hands Jaisu an object, and she asks what it is. The guy replies that it is a shield that protects the heart, so it needs to be wrapped around the body. The player acquired this shield for his points, because Jaisu spent hers on increasing experience. The girl smiles and promises to return the points later. Zihan asks a friend what kind of weapon she will buy for herself. The girl looks through the objects and sees a sword, a spear, a blunt weapon and a bow. Only 4 types. Among all these weapons, Jaisu decided to buy a mace. The young man is surprised by this choice, but quickly realizes that with the skill Honkelsuragin it does not matter what kind of weapon to use. For beginners, it is more convenient than what you can brush off, and not cut and chop. Minotaur stands thoughtfully and examines the assortment of the store. Zihan asks the schoolgirl what happened to her. The girl thought that the young man would buy her some kind of weapon. The guy grins and replies that he has no interest in buying her something. Besides, when he offered her points, the schoolgirl refused. The girl is angry at the guy. He, in turn, says that the cheapest weapon costs 200 points. Zihan asks if she has that amount. After hearing the amount that the guy said, the schoolgirl was horrified. She was very surprised that Zihan had such a number of points. The young man replied that in her place he would collect points and not waste time robbing banks. Night fell on the streets, and the team moved on to the Roman Tower. On the way they met goblins. Zihan was attacked by a monster and the young man pierced him through with a sword. Once the player has purchased a weapon, he decided to try out a platinum level reward at the same time. Zihan realized that now was the time to use the shape-shifting orichalcum. This is a universal item that can be used in metal or liquid form, depending on the wishes of the owner. Orichalcum coating can be applied to the desired equipment. When the coating is released, it returns to its original shape. It is metal and liquid at the same time. There is also a function of going back. Zihan brings the stone to the sword and a notification appears from the system stating that the application of orichalcum to the short sword is completed. The sword lights up with a yellow light, and it becomes sharper than it was before. This is even higher than his expectations. Zihan understands that the sword can be useful. Jaisu suddenly attracts the attention of his friend and informs him that they have arrived at the Roman Tower. The girl said that the tower looks better than she thought. Minotaur said that this was normal, because the world had just begun to change, and she seemed to have adapted to everything. Zihan asks the schoolgirl how she is going to survive if she does not adapt well to what is happening. The girl suddenly decided to ask what friends had a task. The young man replied that they needed to kill the monster boss. Hearing this, the schoolgirl was extremely surprised that such tasks still exist. Zihan decided to ask what task she had at the second level and Minotaur replied that she had survival. Then the young man understood why her level ended so quickly. After all, they must kill or die at the hands of other players until their number reaches the set. The young man realized that compared to them, their escape was a very peaceful level. Although, if not for Zihan, then all the players would have died at the hands of a guard or hobgoblins. When the team moves closer to the tower, the young man stopped the girls, warning that someone is there. The young man ordered them to hide behind the stones. 2 guys were walking near the entrance to the building. Jaisu thought they were just standing guard, and Zihan assumed they were guarding the borders. The girl did not understand why these men were guarding the borders, because there were no monsters nearby. The guy replied that they were guarding the border not because of monsters, but because of people, outsiders like them. Zihan thought that if this level involves competition among players, like survival, then it becomes clear to him why these guys are standing there. Zihan tells Minotaur that we now means him and Jaisu. The schoolgirl is not included in this number. After these words, the guy asks if she understood what the player is leading to. The girl turns sharply to the guy and asks what he meant. Minotaur realized that Zihan was leading her to change her appearance and go to those guys and find out some information from them. The young man smiles and says that this will be the fastest and most effective way in this situation. Only Zihan has to figure out the situation himself. Friends stand over the girl and ask if she will go to those men. Minotaur realized that she has no choice now and agrees. She moves imperceptibly to the stones that were closer to the entrance and hides behind them. The girl notices that men don't move very fast, so there shouldn't be any problems. If only Mina manages to catch the moment when one of them will not see the other. The next second, the schoolgirl hits one of the men on the back of the neck and he loses consciousness. She hides a man behind rocks and takes on his appearance. The man notices that there is no partner and he turns around to check on him. The guard begins to get angry that his partner is not leaving for the first time during the shift. The man says that if he does not come out now, he will report upstairs. Mina approaches his partner and tells him there's nothing to worry about. He just needed to step away for a couple of seconds and need. The guard tells Mina that there will be a changing of the guard soon and they need to go. Zihan thinks about the strange behavior of the schoolgirl and begins to worry about whether she will be alright. The girl climbs the stairs to catch up with her partner.